I'm Emily Miller. I'm back this year hosting Judicial Watches live at CPAC. It's going to be an exciting year. We've got the Vice President speaking in a little bit, Vice President Pence, President Donald Trump speaking tomorrow. For those of you who are not familiar with Judicial Watch, it's a nonpartisan watchdog group of the government, making sure we have transparency in DC's capital. Something all of you know when you're draining the swamp is vitally important. I'm so excited about my first guest today, Ambassador John Bolton, who was the ambassador to the UN under George Bush, W43, right, and is a fellow at AEI and an absolute brilliant strategist on foreign policy. Ambassador Bolton, what do you think is the greatest challenge we have in America in foreign policy now?
Well, I think the immediate challenges that we face are the continuing threat of radical Islamic terrorism and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, chemical and biological, but mainly the proliferation of nuclear weapons in North Korea and Iran. So these challenges really come together in the person of Iran, which is the largest financier of international terrorism and is pursuing nuclear weapons. But this is something I think the president's got to face, not because of his policies, but because he has inherited the consequences of Obama's failures.
Tell me, President Trump has been in office now for 13 months. How has he moved the ball back away from what the mistakes of the Obama presidency?
Well, I think the most important thing he's made clear is that he's not Barack Obama, and that America's withdrawal from the world, which Obama was accomplishing, is going to be reversed. You know, it's an irony. People say that Donald Trump is the isolationist. He's not. He's a person who defends America's interest. Barack Obama was the isolationist. By withdrawing American influence from positions of strength around the world, he has contributed to a decrease in peace and security. And Trump is trying to reverse that. There's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of risks out there.
What do you think about the effects of the first year of the Trump presidency on the terrible Iran deal that Obama made on his way out the door?
Well, it is a disaster for America. That deal, I think, was the worst act of appeasement in our history. The president's made it very clear he thinks it's the worst deal we've ever done internationally. I wish he had withdrawn from it already, frankly. I think he's likely to do it in May. That certainly would be my hope. That would be my advice. Because I think we have to create a new reality for our European friends. They want to do economic deals with Iran. That will simply strengthen the regime, allow them to continue to finance terrorism and their nuclear and ballistic missile programs. I hope that's what he does, and then we can reverse the Obama policies even more. North Korea is an even more imminent problem, and let's be clear, Iran and North Korea are working together. They both have a desire to have deliverable nuclear weapons, so when George W. Bush first referred to the axis of evil, it's not simply a metaphor, it's a reality. And so Trump's got a crisis in Asia, a crisis in the Middle East that are related.
How serious do you think the crisis? I mean, obviously North Korea is determined to get a nuclear bomb. On the other hand, there's so much you see about, oh, we're going to war, and the especially cable news will say, and I know you're a contributor to Fox News, so I'm not talking about Fox specifically. And I worked at State Department, so I'm speaking, not to be alarmist, but the chances of going to war with North Korea, American going to war, you just keep hearing the same drumbeat of Donald Trump's going to take us to war in North Korea. Donald Trump is a danger. Put that more in real life terms.
Yeah. Well, the problem in its most acute form is the fact that North Korea has made very substantial progress both in its nuclear capability and in its ballistic missile program. So CIA Director Mike Pompeo said just a few weeks ago that North Korea was within a handful of months, his phrase, handful of months, from being able to drop a thermonuclear device on any American city. So Trump's options are limited. This is the consequence of 25 years of failure. I still hope China will see the danger here and do something dramatic, but we may be facing a very unhappy choice. It's not anything that Trump did, but the answer is going to have to come in his administration. Either we accept North Korea with nuclear weapons, or we look at a preemptive use of military force, not to have general war in the Korean Peninsula, but but to destroy their nuclear program. And these are not good options. Neither one of them is. Nobody should like where we are, but you can thank the previous presidents for putting us in this box.
Well, as you're talking, I'm remembering before you were ambassador to UN, your head, and I can only remember the acronym in the State Department of, what was the nuclear?
I was Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security. I was T in the State Department.
T. The State Department is so funny. It's all acronyms.
Right.
You were T, that's right. As you were talking, I was remembering that. So this is why I wanted to ask you these questions about North Korea specifically, because they get so much attention. Preemptive strike is interesting. And what I see regularly is this: we're going to have a war. The North Koreans aren't, Kim Jong-un is not crazy and suicidal. He is not going to bomb America. No, he knows that we have the capabilities to destroy them in 20 minutes. So explain sort of how the deterrent works or doesn't work.
Right. Look, I think that regime is rational in their own terms, but they're not rational in our terms. That's what makes them dangerous. And I think their objective is to take over the Korean Peninsula. They tried it in 1950. They didn't make it. They've never given up. So how does that relate to his nuclear program? Let's say tomorrow they did have just undisputed capability to hit targets in America with thermonuclear weapons. I think what the regime would likely do is say, withdraw all American forces from South Korea, or we will consider using these weapons. So under a weak president, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they might well withdraw American forces. That endangers South Korea. That's what the South Koreans have to understand. Many of them do, unfortunately many don't. So it's the ability to use the nuclear weapons to achieve North Korea's objectives that puts all of us in greater danger. Japan is next after South Korea. And also, I think something not well understood, North Korea is one of the poorest countries on earth, and yet it's been able to achieve these major advances. They will sell that technology to anybody with hard currency. It's a profit center for North Korea potentially, to Iran, to terrorist groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, to other would-be nuclear powers. So that's why the issue on North Korea and Iran as well will tell us whether a half a century of American counter-proliferation efforts are going to succeed or fail.
A last question, and it's just where we started on ISIS. Where do you see progress? Where do you see the challenges? Where do we go from here?
Look, I think it's been critical to destroy the ISIS territorial caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and I think the president dramatically increased the success of the American-advised forces there. Under Obama, who knows how long it would have taken. But the struggle against ISIS isn't over. While Obama was slow-rolling the military effort, many ISIS leaders and cadre got out of the Middle East. They're now in places like Yemen or Libya or the Afghan-Pakistan border region. So the ISIS terrorist threat, I think, is still real. They're not like there are corporate organizational differences between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. People go back and forth.
Right.
This terrorist threat is still out there, and nobody should ignore it.
And thank you so much for being here. You're speaking when?
I'm on a panel today that begins at 12:05. There's and it's on where's the biggest threat, Russia, China, or the rogue states. And then tomorrow there's about the same time another panel on China. So a lot of emphasis on national security. I think that's very appropriate.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It was great to see you. You too. All right. Thank you. We'll let the ambassador go. All right. And next up we have Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow from the Heritage Foundation. I'm being told, here he is. Hans, I'm so sorry. I just ruined your name.
That's okay.
How about you say it? How about you say it?
Hans von Spakovsky. It's typical Alabama name.
All right. No,
Spakovsky.
Spakovsky.
But call me Hans.
I know to call you Hans, but I've never actually had to say your last name out loud before.
Right.
So Spakovsky.
That's it. Spakovsky.
Okay. Great. So you're senior fellow at Heritage for.
That's right.
Tell me, what is your focus here at CPAC? Your focus for conservatives.
Well, I work on a lot of issues, but my biggest issue is election integrity, and I know Judicial Watch does a lot in that area. In fact, one of the few conservative organizations that actually does work in that area. So
Yeah.
I'm very concerned, particularly about a problem that I think is growing, and that is the problem of non-citizens registering and voting in our elections.
And yes, Judicial Watch does, lawsuits and like, such yeoman's work for a lot of transparency, the government and election fraud and integrity. Tell me, where do you see progress being made under a conservative, or Donald Trump, a conservative Republican president, and where does it still need work to do? Because obviously, I won't say obviously, but maybe President Obama wasn't that concerned about the.
He wasn't at all. In fact, in the 8 years that Obama was president, the Justice Department didn't actually prosecute any election fraud cases, even when they were sent information and files on cases that could have easily prosecuted. I know that because I know that personally because I sent them. I sent them cases they could have easily prosecuted, and they had no interest in.
Give me an example of something that is so obvious that they just didn't use. They didn't prosecute.
I was on a county election board in Virginia, and we discovered almost 300 individuals who were not U.S. citizens who had registered. About half of them had actually voted in prior elections. We did the right thing. We took them off the voter rolls, and then we sent their names and files to the U.S. Justice Department because it is a felony under federal law for a non-citizen to register and vote.
Well, also, generally, it's a felony to be in the country as a non-citizen.
Well, these were people who were here legally.
I see.
But still,
you
can't register and vote.
Right.
So what do you think the Obama Justice Department did about all those non-citizens? They did absolutely nothing. And that is typical, unfortunately, of the way the Justice Department operated during the Obama administration.
Well, I mean, it is, not all, but a lot of Democratic agenda politically under the radar is something that Judicial Watch cares a lot about. Getting people to vote who may not be able.
No, I agree with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why progressive liberal groups worked so hard to prevent President Trump's advisory commission, election integrity, from being able to operate.
That's right.
Remember, the president unfortunately dissolved that commission before it could finish its job in January. And the reason was that progressive groups had filed almost a dozen lawsuits, meritless, frivolous lawsuits, to prevent it from operating, to the point where the very lean staff of the commission was spending 100% of their time fighting these lawsuits. Also, we had about a third of the states refuse to provide us with any of the data we were looking for, voter registration data, because they clearly didn't want us finding out that, for example, they have lots of people who are also registered in other states who may be voting in more than one state illegally, or they may have people who are dead still on the voter rolls.
The double state voting is
Yes.
such a major issue.
It
What do you think? I've seen, just because of Russian influence, trying to influence the electronic part of voting. I've been reading lately there's a movement for states want to go back to paper ballots. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, look, there are various ways you can vote. A lot of folks don't like electronic voting machines for various reasons. Look, the best kind of voting machine probably is what people call OptiScan. That is a paper ballot. It's the kind where you fill in a bubble next to the name, but then they feed it through a computer scanner to count it.
This was the hanging chads, though.
No, hanging chads are a different kind of machine. They don't use that
okay.
anymore.
Really?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know
yeah.
that. All right.
But the advantage of that kind of
yes, I know. You do the little bubble with the pencil.
exactly right.
Okay.
The advantage of that is you have paper ballots, so you can always go back and check them.
Recount. Mm-hmm.
But you have a computer scanner, so you have the speed of a computer to count them.
All right.
So that's probably the best system out there right now for voting.
And how many states use that?
Most of the states use those, but there are other states like Georgia. Georgia switched over years ago to an entirely electronic system. So they only have electronic voting machines there.
I mean, even if we look take out Russia. It is, I think people do feel insecure about voting just on a computer for hacks, for influence. I vote in the People's Republic of the District of Columbia, and it's all electronic, it's all computers, and I'm like, as a Republican,
Well, there's a great story about the District of Columbia. Excuse me. A couple of years ago, they decided they wanted to allow internet voting. So they hired a contractor who came in, set up a system, and said, oh, it's great, nobody will ever be able to get into it. And DC was so sure that no one would be able to hack it that they set up a fake election and challenged hackers to try to get into it. A University of Michigan a computer science professor signed this to his class. Within 24 hours, they had hacked into the system. The DC folks had no idea that they had been able to get into it, and the only way they finally figured it out was because at the end, when you had cast your vote in this mock election, where it usually will say thank you?
Uh-huh.
The hackers at the university changed it so it would play the Michigan fight song. And that's how they finally figured out that they had hacked into the system. But that tells you the danger of the idea of internet voting.
But it also talks to you a lot about how DC is run, and they're just like...
Yeah. That is very true.
So you are here. Are you on a panel? Are you speaking? You're here to attend?
I'm actually not speaking this year. I've spoken in past years.
Right,
So I'm just here to actually hear the Vice President and the President speak and go to all the various sessions.
Yeah, the Vice President Pence is coming up at 10:30. He's been relatively quiet. We don't hear from him that much in this administration. But he's so beloved by conservatives for his track record. Tell me what you're interested in hearing him talk to this audience of conservatives.
I want to hear him talk about the problems that we have facing the country. And those problems include a huge budget deficit, a huge debt, government programs that are just out of control with their growth. And if we don't do something about this, if we don't get that under control, I have a lot of fear for the future of the country. And I think that's something that I hope the Vice President will talk about.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to try again. Okay, Hans von
Spakovsky. And can I?
I'm from Baltimore, so I have a natural slur anyway. It's hard to get rid of.
And can I just say that I want to compliment Judicial Watch. The job that you do in trying to make sure that our government operates transparently so that Americans know what's happening, it is a vital function, and everybody ought to be thankful that you guys are doing that job.
Thank you very much. It is, it doesn't matter who's in office, who's the majority.
Exactly.
It is the government. When you've got power, the fraud can be there.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here. All right, we have next Jerry Dunleavy, part of Judicial Watch. You can come talk to me about what we were just talking about. And Jerry, you heard Hans, and I'm not going to try to say his last name, talking about the value of Judicial Watch. So just tell me about your major cases right now, what you're focusing on, and what is the main agenda. I'll just give you the mic.
Sure. Well, I mean, a great thing about my job at Judicial Watch is I host sort of a web series that we do inside Judicial Watch where I kind of go in depth with our investigators and our attorneys about all the different cases and lawsuits and investigations that Judicial Watch is carrying out. Right now, I think at the forefront of a lot of people's minds is sort of the entire Russia investigation, and that involves, of course, Mueller and Comey and. Yeah.
So tell me, what is Judicial Watch? What lawsuits do you have, or what actions are you doing? Because obviously, yes, the Russian integrity and the FBI and that special prosecutor and Mueller are such big issues. What is Judicial Watch doing?
Sure. So one of our major lawsuits right now is trying to get the FISA applications.
Explain for people what that is.
Absolutely. So a FISA application is something that needs to be applied for in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Courts in order to essentially surveil American citizens. And apparently FISA warrants were a FISA warrant or FISA warrants were obtained on a member or members of the Trump campaign. And so Judicial Watch is doing everything that we can to get that FISA application released, because it's our...
So let's just clarify for people who may not be in the weeds as we are here in Washington. A FISA court is established so that you go to court and you say, these are the reasons that we need to spy on, we, the American government, need to spy on Americans, which is a dangerous place. And a court, from what I understand, is it's not open to the public. So they did this for the Obama administration, if I understand correctly, did it for to be able to spy on Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. Is that correct?
I believe that the specific FISA warrants that we know about were for Carter Page, actually.
Okay.
And so Judicial Watch's concern with those FISA applications is sort of the centrality that it looks like the so-called Trump dossier ended up playing in the FISA application. And of course, as we now know, that dossier was actually funded through a law firm, through Fusion GPS, who hired...
Let me explain to people what you're talking about. So there's this thing called the Trump dossier you hear about a lot, and what it is sort of like a research on Trump, opposition research would probably be the simplest way to put it. And it was funded by the Democrats. It was funded by the Hillary campaign on one of her allies, and it was used in order to get this called FISA permit to spy on Trump campaign, which makes it sound utterly political, obviously. So what Judicial Watch is trying to do is see the FISA, look at the transcripts, find out what happened in that court. Did they have anything other than Democrats saying, or in Hillary Clinton campaign, saying, let's spy on the Trump campaign? Is that a simple way of putting it?
Exactly right. And we've had the House Intelligence Committee, or the House Select Committee on Intelligence. The Republican side put out a memo outlining some of the declassified abuses that they believe were there. The Democrats put together their own memo, and so we've got these partisan memos sort of floating around. Judicial Watch, we want to cut through the partisanship. We want to see the facts, and that's what we're trying to do in court. We're trying to cut through we're glad that the Republican memo was released. We'd like to see the Democrat memo released as well. But ultimately, we want to see the original documents. We want to see, what did the FBI tell the court? How did they justify what they were doing, and how did the court respond? Because ultimately, this is sort of consuming the country in a lot of ways. The Russian meddling and their attempts to sow chaos and that sort of thing, and now we've got sort of partisan memos coming out, and we think that the easiest way to solve this, and the easiest way to get to the bottom of this, is just release the FISA applications, redact whatever needs to be redacted, but get the truth out there. And so that's a major case that we're currently working on.
And that's what's the value of Judicial Watch. I remember asking last year, after Trump won, Tom Fitton and Chris Farrell and all those guys, I'm like, so what do you do now? You spent 8 years uncovering all this fraud and abuse of Hillary Clinton's emails and all that stuff, so now what? And they're like, oh, we don't stop. Right. When obviously we know that Judicial Watch is nonpartisan, it is conservative, but number one is the truth and transparency in government, and I know that's why Americans are so supportive of Judicial Watch because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that no matter which party is in charge, no matter who's the president, we're going to continue doing what we do. We're going to continue fighting for the truth, and that's what we're all about, and that's what we're committed to.
Thank you. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Well, he'll be back more later.
Thanks.
We have a new guest. Can I So just for those of you who are just tuning in, we are waiting for Vice President Pence to speak, which is so exciting because we don't get to hear from Vice President Pence a lot. True conservative, and to speak to a conservative audience. And you can also watch us. Make sure to tune in. You can watch us on Facebook, Judicial Watch Facebook page, Judicial Watch Twitter account or Judicial Watch's YouTube. And it's all just like it sounds and spelled the same way. And now up we have Kira Innes, who's the Millennial Outreach Director of CORE Godfather. They're ready to say Director of CORE. Come with me, Kira. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Great to be here.
So tell me about CORE and Godfather. He just ran away.
Well, my grandfather, Roy Innes, who founded CORE, which is the conservative civil rights group, the Congress of Racial Equality, and I was appointed by Niger Innes, my uncle, as the Millennial Outreach Director. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying I talk to millennials about conservative socio-political economics, and why the conservative right is just the best route to take, regardless of your bracket, your gender, your class, all of those things, your ethnicity, and some tune in and they figure it out. Some, the millennials are an iffy group.
It's challenging. It's challenging to get millennials' attention and then to figure out what they care about. Tell me, what do you think their priorities are?
Well, I think if you ask them the real questions, their priorities are they want to make money, earn a living, be independent, keep what they make, and they want to be able to have a little dignity and self-respect for themselves. They don't want to live perpetually in their mom's basement. But
it's funny you said it, because that's the perception, and that's always obviously the joke of millennials, is that because they could stay on their parents' health care to 25 and their parents' cell phone plan, that they're all living with their parents. But you who work on this every day, that's not the people you meet.
That's not really it. And also what they want is transparency. Someone that I've talked to just kind of throughout the day, kind of doing a man on the street type thing, they have said that they want to see transparency in their government. And one of the things that have allowed for so much corruption, and I think because they're not being told the truth about specifically the leftist ideology, they're being given basically a line of goods. Mm-hmm. They believe it. And if we had transparency in our government, you would probably, a lot of them thinking, well, you know what, that side doesn't really seem to bode well for me. I don't think that that's what's in my best interest. But the other side, perhaps maybe, and when I start telling them, the origins and the actual, truth behind the scenes, it's like a light bulb begins to kind of grow ever brighter in their heads, and that's what I live for, to see that kind of like transformation right in front of me. And minorities suffer the most under that lack of transparency.
Explain that. Two things I wanted you to explain to me. I find the problem with young people in conservatism is it takes a while to understand. It's fact-based. Conservatism is fact-based, policy-based, whereas liberalism is feelings. I feel so bad about this. Right. Yeah. So first talk about that, and then I want to talk about race issues. But talk about how you have found ways to communicate to young people that is approachable.
Well, the way I go about it usually is I ask them the questions. I say, what do you know about either party? And oftentimes they'll give me, pretty much just the general CNN dribble of what the conservative party is. And then when I ask, okay, well, so what do you think about the leftist party? And again, just the general CNN dribble of what the leftist party is. And I say, well, did you know, and I will fill in X, Y, and Z about the origins, the history. And they're like, well, no, that's not what, Don Lemon told me. No, that's not what Wolf Blitzer said. And I'm like, no.
Right.
And then so what I do is ask them the questions about the origins. I explain to them, and I say, we were once a country where 18-year-olds, even younger, that were fighting in Normandy, and I kind of explain kind of how, I hate to say, not for lack of a better term, they were hardcore, keep it edited, but they were hardcore, and these guys were like rock stars in terms of just being independent, 15-year-old boys, were storming our beaches, and I make it I don't want to glamorize it, over romanticize it, but I just let them know that that's the kind of people we used to be, and they're like, wow, because it almost kind of makes them think well, that's not who I am, that's not who my friends are, that's not what I've ever seen growing up, and these guys had, regardless of whether they leaned right or left, they had more of a traditional mindset, faith in country and family, and independence, yes. And that I think that kind of coaxes them. And then when I tell them how they've gotten to this point, where they're kind of emasculated, the men, and kind of confused as the women, you have the left to thank for that. And they're like, well, dang. And so you start to show them that what they are, put kind of a mirror up to them and kind of give them who's kind of to blame for that, but what can fix it. And that really helps them to kind of see things.
And tell me, obviously, it is a perception of conservatism is it's a bunch of old white men. And I mean, I know I get it all the time. And
Yeah,
so,
as a woman.
as a woman, and for you as African American, you know, we are not what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be liberal. We're supposed to be. So tell me about that.
Well, I mean, okay, so mathematically, I probably should not exist. I am a millennial, so I'm young.
Right.
I'm a minority. I'm black. I'm a minority. I'm a woman, so I'm supposed to be all for
Right.
Cecile Richardson Planned Parenthood, and I live in Los Angeles, California.
Wow. You're like the quad.
And yet,
right.
I'm a hardcore conservative Trumpian. This is a rare moment where I'm not wearing my hat. You usually never see me without it. I will walk through, East LA or, somewhere in Santa Monica with it. I get a lot of...
You're talking about your Make America Great Ahead.
Bright red one, yes.
Yeah.
And so mathematically, I shouldn't exist at all, but I do. And it's, my conservative journey started at like 8 years old. I realized then that I wanted to do this and
Wow.
put the message out there. And I would learn in the years to come that yes, there are not a lot of us, but we can fix that because our origins were Republican. It was the abolitionists who founded the Republican Party, those who fought against slavery and oppression and segregation. And so for us to have kind of deviated from that history and have bought in the lie of the left, it just perplexes me. We're not a stupid people. We've got the brain God gave us. So, knowing that history and not getting involved with the emotions of what I feel and all the race baiting and the pandering. Quite frankly, it's extremely offensive, the pandering that we receive. And so if I can be a voice to any number of minorities, specifically, brown-skinned ones, black people, to help them wake up. And some are. The statistics are growing in our favor. We are now at 12% black women who support Trump.
Wow,
And almost 20, oh yeah, it started at 4% in 2016. It almost tripled by this year, and it was about 11% men, black men in 2016. It has doubled to almost 24% by this year. And
Let's just look.
Yeah.
1/4 of black men support Donald Trump.
that is actually the numbers, and I think that's the reason why DOC has become a huge deal for the left, because they realize they're losing their grip on the long-standing, loyalty that we once gave them. Some are still awake, but a lot of them are waking up, and I think that's why they have to now import voters to now vote for them. They're like, well, we're losing the blacks, let's get the Hispanics in here.
Oh.
And honestly,
We'll
that's
just take a place.
yeah.
What do you explain for that, such a shift in his first year? What policies do you think appeal to minorities?
I think with minorities specifically, if I had to guess,
Why?
they are responding to his kind of hardcore, no nonsense, like no mincing of words, take charge approach. They're like, look, African Americans, you've been voting 50, 60 plus years Democrat, and what has it gotten you? Nothing. So really, what have you got to lose? And they were like, well, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'll see. And then once they started to see the numbers roll in, when they started to see more money in their pocketbook, when they started to see more of them being employed, we have had a record high in employment, thus a record low in unemployment in the black community that we have not seen the likes of since the 70s. So we're going on upwards of almost 50 years of a record high in economic surplus. And that's only going to continue if we allow Trump to be Trump. If the black community can get behind him, which we are doing in a pretty growing record of numbers, I think that other people, will fall in line and say, well, you know what? If blacks can get behind Trump, then I can get behind Trump, because everyone's afraid to be called a racist. And I think if we're the standard, so if we say it's okay, then it's like whites and other ethnics say, okay, then I can get behind him. I think that's kind of silly, be behind him because he's on the right side of things, literally, but also because that regardless of what some people think, they will figure it out soon. It took us years and years, but we're starting to wake up, and that, quite frankly, does my heart, so good, because the main thing that's always been a source of just stress is like, how can my people finally wake up? When are they ever going to wake up? And we're starting to see that.
And economics. I mean, it's cutting the taxes and growing the economy. That's a message that sees no color, race, gender.
It does not. The only color really that matters when it comes to economics is green, and a lot of black people are seeing it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think when it's all said and done, they might, pretend like, oh, I'm not for Trump, oh, dump Trump, but then when it comes to when they step into that voting booth and it's just them, no one else, they'll vote their pocketbook. I really believe that.
And on that note, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And we are going to go. I see Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA right now, is on stage, and he is introducing, from what I can tell, or he's going to be introducing Vice President Pence, who we don't hear from very often. This is his base, the conservatives here at CPAC. So it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say about conservative agenda and conservative policies in the Trump administration. We'll go watch that now.
Us all in this country. And I refuse to leave this stage until I say one more time that we must immediately harden our schools. Every day, young children are being dropped off at schools that are virtually wide open, soft targets for anyone bent on mass murder. It should not be easier for a madman to shoot up a school than a bank or a jewelry store or some Hollywood gala. Schools must be the most hardened targets in this country. And evil must be confronted immediately with all necessary force to protect our kids. I said 5 years ago, after that horrible tragedy in Newtown, and I wish, oh God, I wish more had heeded my words. So lean in, listen to me now, and never forget these words. To stop a bad guy with a gun, it takes a good guy with a gun. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome ACU Chairman Matt Schlapp.
Hello, everyone. Is that not a beautiful stage? You know what those buildings are, right? See the White House, the Capitol, the Supreme Court. We all know what's at stake. And as you think through all the things we're dealing with as a country and in society, we realize how important it is and how lucky those of us are who have a life partner to take the journey with. As a country, we're so fortunate to have a woman of humility and deep faith taking this interesting journey along with our Vice President. We often say about Vice President Pence that he has this stellar conservative record in Congress, as the governor of Pennsylvania, now your Vice President. Do you know what his Come on. Come on, we got some Hoosiers out here. All right, that's good. Do you know what his lifetime rating was with the American Conservative Union? It was 98%. 98%. And I've come to realize one of the reasons why his votes in Congress were so solid for our conservative values. I think he didn't want to go home and tell his wife if he cast a bad vote. We're so fortunate to have Karen Pence, along with her husband, over there in the White House, making a difference. She believes in supporting the rights of the unborn. She believes in helping our military families and spouses. She's been a teacher, she's a mom, but more importantly, she respects all of you, and she's our friend. Please give a warm CPAC welcome to the Second Lady of the United States, Karen Pence.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, CPAC, for that warm, warm welcome. What an honor to be able to address you today, and what a treat to introduce my husband. And I do want to introduce him today. I want to introduce you to a different side of Mike Pence that you may not know. For years, people in Indiana heard his conservative commentary on his radio show. We called him Rush Limbaugh on decaf. And then for 12 years, on the floor of the United States Congress, he fought for conservative principles. Yeah. Next, he governed as a conservative governor in our home state of Indiana. And today, he will speak to you as Vice President. But that Mike Pence you already know. I'd like to take this opportunity to pull back the curtain and show you the Mike Pence that I know. I'd like you to see this man that I've been married to for 32 years. A man, thank you. A man who has supported me as a teacher. He actually would come to my back-to-school nights. He also supported me as a stay-at-home mom when I wanted to be home. Yeah. And I used to do these watercolor fairs, and he would come to my booth and help sell the watercolors. And now he firmly supports my initiative of art therapy. But I want you to see a little more about him. So here we go. 5 facts you need to know about Mike Pence. Don't you love those? Number 1, if it's Friday night, we'd better be having pizza for dinner, supreme thin crust with an O'Doul's. Every Friday night. Number 2, now this is a good one for you to hear about. The feedback that he respects the most comes from his 3 kids, all 3 of them. We raised them to be independent thinkers, to climb their own mountains, to not be afraid to speak up and disagree with us. So he knows their comments are honest and sometimes hard-hitting, and their praise is sincere. He values their opinions above all, even above mine, because my job, as we all know, is to keep him humble. So I don't always give him all this positive feedback. Number 3, you may not know this about him. Mike Pence is a cartoon artist. I know, got you, didn't I? In law school, he drew the weekly cartoon for the law school paper. It was called Law School Daze, D-A-Z-E. And Daze was the main character, a law student, fashioned after yours truly, Mike Pence. So for his law school graduation present, I took all of the cartoons and I put them in a book. So we have a book now of all of his cartoons. And when I was teaching 2nd grade, we used to have my students over for dinner in small groups, and he would draw a caricature of each one of them before they left that evening. Number 4, what would Mike Pence buy if he could buy anything? A horse. He has always wanted a horse. And I think riding horses is really the only place he truly relaxes. And number 5, he loves a good book, especially the good book. He is a voracious reader, from historical novels to biographies to mysteries to Christian books to political commentaries. He loves a good book. So thank you for letting me introduce my husband, Vice President Mike Pence.
Well, hello, CPAC. And thank you to my wonderful wife, Karen. Isn't she something? A teacher, an artist, a Marine Corps mom, and the Second Lady of the United States. Would you give Karen one more round of applause for all that she does for the cause and the country? And it is great to be back at CPAC 2018, the largest gathering of conservatives in America every single year. Thank you all for being here. And before I begin and talk about the progress we've made, allow me to take a moment to address what I know is on all of our hearts this morning. The terrible attack that claimed the lives of 17 Americans and injured more last week in Parkland, Florida. In America, we mourn with those who mourn and grieve with those who grieve. And yesterday, President Trump and I met with the family of Meadow Pollack and other students and families reeling from the attack in Parkland. We also met in the White House with families from other communities who've experienced the same violence firsthand. And as the President said, we'll never forget it. We prayed with them. We listened to them as they poured out their hearts. As the President has said, no child, no teacher should ever be in danger in an American school. Earlier this week, President Trump called on Congress to strengthen background checks, and 2 days ago he directed the Department of Justice to expedite the regulation of bump stocks. Later this week, when the President meets with the nation's governors in our nation's capital, we'll make the safety of our nation's schools and our students our top national priority. I can assure you all of this. President Trump and our entire administration will continue to take strong action to make our schools safe and to give law enforcement and our families the tools they need to deal with those struggling with dangerous mental illness. So as we move forward, we'll continue to work, and we'll continue with all of you to pray for God's grace and comfort for all the families impacted by this terrible attack. And we'll pray for God's wisdom, that all of us in positions of authority might find a way to come together with American solutions to confront and end this evil in our time. So thank you. It is great to be back at CPAC. And I stand here today with profound gratitude to say that because of all of you, because of the conservative majorities in Congress that you helped elect, and because of the strong leadership of the President you put in the White House, 2017 was the most consequential year in the history of the conservative movement. True. And tomorrow, you'll hear firsthand from the man who galvanized that movement. You know, I spoke to him on the phone this morning, and I can tell you he can't wait to get here. The man who won a historic election, the man who's been delivering on the promises that he made every day since, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. You know, I'm here because I stand with President Trump. I'm here because we stand with the conservative movement. And come to think of it, we always stand for our flag and our national anthem as well. But what a year. You know, when President Trump addressed you last February, he declared in his words that our victory was a victory and a win for conservative values. And so it was. And now he and I are both back here at CPAC this week to thank you for everything you've done to advance our cause. Because of your support in this past year, it's been a year of action. It's been a year of remarkable results. In a word, it's been a year of promises made and promises kept. I mean, think about it. President Trump promised to rebuild our military and restore the arsenal of democracy, and in just a few weeks, he'll sign the largest investment in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. He promised to stand without apology for the men and women of law enforcement, and today we're once again giving those peace officers the respect and the resources they deserve all across America. President Trump promised to enforce our laws, secure our borders, and today illegal crossings at our southern border have been cut nearly in half, and make no mistake about it, we're going to build that wall. He promised to appoint strong conservatives to the federal courts at every level, and President Trump came through. He appointed Justice Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court and set a record for the most circuit court judges appointed in the first year of any administration in history. And President Donald Trump promised to stand for the unalienable right to life. And from the first day of this administration, he reinstated the Mexico City policy, and I was honored to cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate to send a bill to the president's desk to allow states to defund Planned Parenthood. On the economy, we've unleashed American energy, approved the Keystone and Dakota pipelines, and President Trump put America first when he withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. And we've been busy rolling back the heavy hand of government as well. This president has actually repealed 22 regulations for every new federal rule put on the books. And finally, President Trump promised to cut taxes across the board for working families and job creators. And 2 months ago today, President Trump signed the largest tax cuts and tax reform in American history. Promises made, promises kept. And on the world stage, we've also been restoring strong American leadership. And under President Donald Trump, America once again stands without apology as leader of the free world. Our NATO allies are contributing more to our common defense than ever before, and for decades. After one president after another promised to move the U.S. Embassy to the capital of our most cherished ally, President Trump made history on December 6 when the United States of America recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. So we've stood with our allies, and we've stood up to our enemies. And nowhere is that more true than in the fight against radical Islamic terror. Under this Commander-in-Chief, we've taken the fight to the terrorists on our terms, on their soil. Thanks to the courage of our armed forces and the leadership of this Commander-in-Chief, ISIS is on the run, their caliphate has crumbled, and we will not rest or relent until we destroy ISIS at its source, so it can no longer threaten our nation, our allies, or our way of life. And we put the leading state sponsor of terror on notice as well. The United States will no longer tolerate Iran's destabilizing activities across the region, and this country will no longer certify the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. And in the wake of provocations and threats against the United States and our allies, we've made it clear to North Korea that the era of strategic patience is over. Two weeks ago, I was honored to lead the official delegation to the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, where we cheered on Team USA. But as you all know, many in the mainstream media seem quite taken with another dignitary. You know, for all the media fawning over the sister of the North Korean dictator, I think it's important that every American knows who this person is and what she's done. The sister of Kim Jong-un is a central pillar of the most tyrannical and oppressive regime on the planet. An evil family clique that brutalizes, subjugates, starves, and imprisons its 25 million people. Even the United Nations reported that, in their words, the gravity, scale, and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have a parallel in the contemporary world. That's why the United States government has sanctioned her for her role in abetting North Korea's horrendous human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. People are routinely jailed and executed for the most minor acts of defiance. And every American remembers the heartbreaking story of Otto Warmbier. So for all those in the media who think I should have stood and cheered with the North Koreans, I say, the United States of America doesn't stand with murderous dictatorships. We stand up to murderous dictatorships. And we will keep standing strong until North Korea stops threatening our country, our allies, or until they abandon their nuclear and ballistic missiles once and for all. So in this White House, it's about strength. It's about growth for our nation. And it's working. America is more secure, and our economy is booming. You know, since Election Day 2016, businesses large and small have created more than 2.5 million new jobs across this country. Unemployment hasn't been this low in 17 years, and more Americans are working today than ever before in American history. After 8 years of a stagnant economy and wages that wouldn't budge, American workers are seeing their paychecks rise faster today than at any point in nearly a decade. And more than 1.5 million Americans have left the rolls of food stamps and now are able to support and sustain themselves with dignity and self-worth. But I know in my heart that the best is yet to come, because as we speak, our economy has already started to feel the effects of that historic tax cut. About 90% of working Americans are going to get a tax cut. Millions are already seeing more money in their paychecks and feeling it in their wallets. And we didn't just cut taxes on your income. The Obamacare individual mandate tax is gone. You know, since the president's tax cuts became the law of the land, businesses large and small have actually announced more than $480 billion in new investments in American jobs, American workers, and in just the past 2 months, more than 4.3 million Americans have already gotten a raise or a bonus, and we're just getting started. Folks, that's great news. That's great news. But not everybody thinks it's that big of a deal. I don't know if you heard, but the woman that wants to be Speaker of the House again, Nancy Pelosi, said, she actually said the tax cuts would be Armageddon before they passed. But just a few days ago, she said it was unpatriotic to let the American people keep more of what they earn. But most amazingly of all, she keeps saying that a $1,000 bonus for working Americans is nothing more than crumbs. Well, let me remind all of you, I come from the Joseph A. Bank wing of the West Wing of the White House. Okay. All right. I mean, seriously, folks, when our kids were little, we had a term for another $1,000 in our paycheck at the end of the year. Christmas. You with me? I mean, these bonuses have meant real money. They've helped working families all across this country with pay raises that are generating opportunities even as we speak. And I want to say from my heart, any leader who says that $1,000 in the pockets of working families is crumbs is out of touch with the American people. You know, it would be a disaster for our cause if Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House again. But we're not going to let it happen. But this movement should know it's a very real threat, because the other side knows exactly what's at stake between now and the end of this year. The far left has watched with dismay as we've dismantled the liberal legacy of the last administration and turned this country around. And they're doing everything they can to try and win back the Congress next November. I mean, we don't have to wonder what would happen if the party of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer won the House and the Senate this November, do we? I mean, remember the last time it happened?
Well, we're going to take you back. That was, as you saw, Vice President Pence giving a very important message right now on the midterm elections coming up in November, and a very real chance the Republicans could lose the majority. There's a lot of retirements. There's a lot of unpredictability going into this election, and I think his most important point was saying, do you really want House Speaker Nancy Pelosi again? The Vice President also talked about this past year, which is the first year of the Trump administration, 2017. He called the most consequential year in history of the conservative movement. And he said, and I think this is pointed to this audience of conservatives, we made our promises made and promises kept, referring to things such as tax cuts, getting rid of individual mandate for Obamacare, moving the capital of Israel to Jerusalem as far as the United States is concerned. So those are important things. He said that he talked on the phone to the president this morning, and which is sort of interesting to think that they talk on the phone, and that the president is very excited to be at CPAC tomorrow, that he'll be here. We'll be carrying that live as well, President Trump. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, this is Judicial Watch is live at CPAC. You can catch us however you're watching it now. You can also find us on Twitter, our Twitter page at Judicial Watch. The Facebook page is at Judicial Watch, is a live stream. You can send us comments, you can send us questions, whatever you need. Also, the YouTube page is also Judicial Watch is carrying it live in all three settings. And Judicial Watch, I think those of you who know are already fans of this organization, for you know, is a nonpartisan organization, a watchdog group that makes sure and holds government accountable and transparent. And they do fantastic work on a variety of fronts that's absolutely necessary and aligned with President Trump's, obviously aligned, not officially, but the same concept of why he was elected, which is drain the swamp and get those people who are in government or elected, who are not serving the American people honestly, out of here. So joining me now is Sandy Rios, who is American Family Radio host for a long time and a good friend. And so good to see you.
Good to see you too, Emily.
Now, how many CPACs have you been to? You are a regular.
I've lost track. A lot. Almost since the beginning. Is that possible?
Is that
no,
possible?
I've been on Radio Row for years. Yeah, I was with Salem Radio for years here, and now I'm with American Family Radio. So, yeah.
Now, Radio Row is a big thing at CPAC. People who haven't been to CPAC before. Radio Row, which is where we are now, they still call it Radio Row, even though it's also now broadcast and TV. It's all because conservatives, all we had was radio for many years, the only way to reach our audience. Now it's Fox News and some blogs, but really the only way to conservative, and so radio is one of the most important things of CPAC. Talk about Radio Row and you're thinking about how it's always been such a priority of CPAC.
Well, I think someone said, I think it was Michael Medved years ago, I heard him do a lecture on the difference between the left and the right in terms of how they think, and that the right deals in ideas and words. So that translates to radio, ideas and thoughts and words. The left deals in emotions and visual. So that television with short pictures and short images and short messages and emotional pieces speaks to the left. So it's interesting, isn't it? And it's true, it's proven to continue to be true. I mean, the left does not do well on radio because they cannot flesh out their ideas in words because they're not comprehensible. They're not reconcilable.
I've never thought about that before, and it's such an interesting point when you think about who are the biggest radio talk show hosts. I can't think of a liberal one. Is there? I mean, of the top ones, it's always conservative because it's about ideas and words. It's not tears and feelings. It's people can sit in their cars, I do, and listen and learn, and it's a learning.
Well, it's a matter of logic, too.
Logic.
Conservative thought is filled with logic and also fact-based. The left can't say that. They can't make logic, they can't make sense out of their policies and words, but they can appeal to people's emotions with situations and visuals and stories, so there doesn't have to be irrationality behind it. So I think that's important. And when we compare the left and the right, just like in this gun discussion, which I'm sure you're very involved in, Emily, it's really not, it's presented as though it's equal sides with equally strong points of view. Really the tiebreaker, okay, the points of view would be get rid of all guns so there are no more killings. And the other side would be no, you can't take our guns because it's our Second Amendment right. But the truth is that this dispute can be settled with facts. The facts are that all of these killings take place, this is one of the facts, in gun-free zones. They take place where guns are not allowed. That's just a fact.
The mass shootings, to be clear.
The mass shootings, sorry.
Not 90% of most shootings are just...
Yeah, so I'm just saying that's a fact. So that sort of breaks the tie between those two opinions.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. Obviously, you know my position on this, and that it has been frustrating. And we heard Vice President Pence reference the terrible shooting in Parkland High School. I mean, just, you know, sinful, tragic event with teenagers being shot and killed in their school, and all sides, all Americans, all human beings cry for these kids. I mean, this is horrendous. It'll change their lives. No, it's never going back. It is, the devil was at work that day. That being said, there is no gun control law that would have stopped it. And I don't want to criticize the kids who are protesting because they're high school kids, and we, the grown-ups, should be talking to them and educating them. But the left uses these kinds of events, and what I would do if it was my child, if it was the school, I would say, give them facts that will make them feel safer, which is these mass shootings account for an estimated 40 people killed a year. You got horribly, horribly unlucky. But I promise you, those are the ones in Montgomery County who are the capital of the state. This is not going to happen to you. It is very, very, very unlikely. Don't be scared. Try to calm them down. Just express them that you're, instead of saying, yes, this is common, and scaring them more.
Well, recently I watched a documentary on the Beatles. Okay, stay with me. The Beatles, came to the United States, in 1964. And the thing that you're struck with, it's a 2-hour special, is all of the, especially women, but all the teenagers who were swept up in like tremendous amounts, not a handful, not a little crowd here, but stadiums filled with thousands of teenagers screaming and crying because of the Beatles. And I make that point to say, you think, what's happening? What's happening is that they're young. They're 15, 16,
Hormones
17. They do not have the life experience, the knowledge base to discern what's happening before them. They have girls especially have emotional responses, but my point is they just don't have the foundational understanding so that they are capable of leading any effort in our culture. It is absolute nonsense to think that our children, our 15, 16, 17-year-old kids should be telling us, the adults who've lived for decades, what we should do about something so complex as guns. And so I heard someone last night on MSNBC, no, it might have been Fox, say that he lifted out a scripture verse, and he said the Bible says a child shall lead them. That's such a misappropriation.
I don't know where that is in the Bible.
Well, there's a phrase that says, and a little child shall lead them. But it doesn't mean, totally misappropriation of that. It didn't mean that children should lead us. It's just a little bit silly.
Nobody, that's why the Constitution does have minimum ages for elected officials.
Because kids don't know what they don't know. And Emily, to echo your first statement, you know, there are not enough laws in the world to govern man's behavior, whether it's moral or whether it's pulling out a gun or whether it's being faithful to you. There aren't enough laws that Congress could pass to make people behave. And there aren't enough law enforcement agents. There aren't enough FBI agents. There aren't enough policemen
also
to make
we're all
people
sinners,
mind.
so we all are sinning all the time. Let's put us all. I mean, it's a broken world.
Yes, and so our founding fathers said over again that the way we could handle this system that they gave us, which incorporates all this freedom, was that it had to be based on a moral and religious people. Morality and religion. They said it over and over again. Those were the twin pillars that would be the foundation of this kind of freedom. And if you lose morality and if you lose the honor and respect for religion, then there aren't enough laws, there aren't enough policemen. It has to come from within. And this is really the problem, the way it needs to be solved. It's to reinstate morality and the respect and honor of religion, whatever the Christianity, to me, is the religion, no question about it, that this country was founded on. I think I'm a Christian because I believe it is true. And we need to reinstill the honor and respect for that, even if people don't become Christians. So we need religion and morality. That's the twin pillars they're missing, and no laws can put that back in place.
Right. And I think it saddens me that there's a sort of been a common thread in news this week. You see a lot on this, some CNN type places where, conservatives don't care about these children and this teenager is being shot because all they can offer is thoughts and prayers, which is so dismissive that prayers don't matter. Like my prayers are sincere, and I do believe that the strongest thing that can be done.
Well, they dismiss it because they don't understand it, but I think it's left to us to just demonstrate in quietness, not fight back about that. We need to let them see the power of God. I think, God, we just lost Billy Graham yesterday.
Yeah.
If any one man in my lifetime exemplified the power of the true God, it's Billy Graham. And I think if we can unleash through our own personal lives, those of us who also follow him, the actual power of God, there's a lot less that we have to say and a lot more that's going to happen. So that's the secret sauce. It's God himself.
Yes, it is. And I think so, Sandy, I'm being cued. It was so good to see you. I do love seeing you every year here.
I love seeing you too, Emily. I'm glad all the things that God has done in your life. It's a blessing to me.
Yours. And always seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Hopefully I'll see you around.
Yes, sure.
Sandy Rios, make sure you listen to her American Family Network. She is, as you can tell, has such wisdom, and she knows everything that's going on in the world. She's a very interesting person. Again, this is Judicial Watch Live. You can watch us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And if you miss any of the interviews, like our interview earlier with John Bolton, you can watch that. We're going to be putting those up individually. You can on Facebook, you can go back and watch it, or we'll be putting those up on the YouTube page, all these interviews separately, so you can watch them later at your own leisure. And next up, we have Jim Peterson, who is Judicial Watch's senior attorney and an expert on a topic I really want to ask him about, which is the deep state. Jim, thank you for being here. I'll give you that. So, a topic that we have not talked about, even a phrase we didn't use very often until this last year, is deep state. So just for people who may not, who have heard it now but really don't understand what we're talking about, explain what that, in layman's terms, what we're talking about, referencing.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. The deep state is a new term, but that we haven't heard much, but it's for something that's been going on for a long time. Most people probably have a sense that even though administrations change, a lot of things never change in Washington, and that's because there's this embedded bureaucracy in Washington that stays, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and has its own interests going forward. In this case, most of these people are Democrats. Most of them have been employed by Democrats over the years, and what we've seen this year is really a remarkable example of how the deep state in the Washington establishment is doing everything it can to undercut the new presidency of Donald Trump.
And I think it's people. I would say very clearly. What is the size of the government? 3 million people.
Right.
Aside from maybe the military, I think the percentage is 90% Democrat. It's just a matter of principles that Democrats like government and like it, and so they're going to work there. And when a Republican, I worked in the Bush administration, State Department, when a Republican is president, he is given an executive branch that is working against him because they don't want him to succeed. It's not their point of view.
Right.
Now, they're not all actively working against him, but there are some wonderful public servants who are doing their job, whether they believe in it or not, and doing it. But there are some people who are absolutely, having worked at the state, I've seen it firsthand. Right. And so I don't know when it was started, but we created this concept of having each president gets 4,000 political slots. So it includes obviously their cabinet secretaries, and then throughout the executive branch, 4,000 that are at the top to say, we are implementing the president's agenda throughout the branch. But this president hasn't put that many people in. How do you think that has impacted stopping the deep state and stopping people who are resisting from being stopped?
Well, that may be a factor. I think in some places. Large part of that is that the Senate has not been motivated to move quickly on nominees. It takes a long time to get even a non-controversial nominee through the process.
Right. We're 13 months into this administration, right. And we already, ambassadors are empty. I think there's several hundred piled up that the Senate just can't get through because the Democrats are being so resistant.
Well, that's right. You have to ask why, because it's in the absence of political appointees, who's running these agencies? The career agency officials that are right near the top. They're not formally the heads or the deputy secretaries of things, but they're the ones that are actually running it.
Yep.
And as you say, we see this really dramatically in some places like state, where now, because the permanent career employees are unhappy about the new direction that this administration, the new Secretary of State, want to take, morale is awful, waves of people leaving.
That's true, it's true, but they're also leaking those stories.
Well, that's right. If they're not actively working to subvert it, they're actually leaving and complaining that they're not happy about where it's going.
As opposed to doing the job that you are paid for, serving the American people.
Right.
They're leaving, they're quitting, and they're talking to reporters and leaking information. And that's a lot where you guys come in on things that are being leaked, especially national security secrets.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the cases that you've been working on.
Sure, absolutely. From the beginning of the Trump administration, we've been using our primary tool, which is the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA as people call it, to try to uncover what's going on deep in the bureaucracy. And we've already uncovered a lot of really startling information about how not just in state as an example, because the same people that were running the State Department during Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and Kerry, they're still
active.
there.
Yes,
the same people that were resisting turning over her emails are still there.
And just to explain that, because I follow state just since I work there more closely, under the secretary there's a deputy, and there is one under Rex Tillerson, there's a deputy, but the undersecretaries is the next level down, and then the assistant secretaries. And from what I understand, I don't think any of them have been gotten through Senate yet.
Yeah.
So that means it's not that job's not being done. It's being done by the person who was there before, who thinks Hillary Clinton is great, and who thinks her server in Chappaqua is fantastic, right? So
because they all knew about it.
Yes, and they helped build it, and they helped put it on her BlackBerry, and they helped. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
They thought it was fine, and
right.
they were happy. They're entitled to their opinion, I guess, but they were happy with the direction, the foreign policy direction of things that were going on during Hillary and the Obama administration. I mean, that's the direction they want to go. And they're very unhappy when a new Secretary of State wants to come in and go a different direction. God forbid, reduce the size of the agency.
Yeah.
Do those
God forbid,
those kinds of things. So they push back, and we see it in state. Even more seriously in the national security areas, we see it at justice, where
that's the scariest. That's scariest. You're a lawyer, you understand. I mean,
it's very serious.
I think the most serious parts of what the deep state is doing against the Trump administration are in places of national security secrets and lawyers leaking things that are not supposed to be out there.
Right. I mean, and yeah, that is by far the most serious, because it affects not just the individuals, a few individuals, but affects all of our rights when law enforcement and prosecutors, feel entitled to openly violate, laws on privacy, on leaking, and other things. That affects and undercuts all of our rights.
Yes.
And so when we see that it's impossible, apparently, for the FBI or the top Justice Administration officials or the National Security Council for any kind of a secret to be, not just to be maintained, but then they've used the organs of these agencies to violate people's rights. And that's what this whole, the real Russia story is how these agencies were used to literally spy on the Trump team before the election and after the election, in complete disregard of the rights we all have.
And let's go back. We were talking about that earlier, Jerry, about if you weren't watching, we were talking about the FISA. What does FISA stand for again?
It's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I know, we use the acronym.
We all use acronyms, which is a
Welcome
really
to Washington, alphabet soup.
Right.
Everything is an acronym.
Yeah, that's right.
John Bolton was here earlier, and I said, when I was at State, he was at State, and I said, I know you worked in the arms control, and and he goes, I was T. I'm like, that's right. It was a one letter, because I was PA. But everything in Washington is acronyms, and very few people know what they stand for. I have no idea what T stands for in arms control, but he was the Undersecretary for Arms Control. Anyway, on FISA, we can just keep saying it from now on.
Right.
It's the law that says that the American government is going to spy on you. Remember, we couldn't before FISA. It was against the law to spy on Americans. That's why the CIA can only supposedly work outside of, unless obviously you're a criminal, which the FBI can do, but CIA can work outside of the country, not inside the country. FISA allows the government to go to court, get a warrant to spy on Americans, supposedly for what reason? Explain to us how that has played out.
I mean, for legitimate reasons, this process was set up so that, so the government wants to know, obviously, if foreign actors are up to doing things in the United States, or they're conspiring with people in the United States. So it makes sense that on certain occasions, certain very limited occasions, the government would have a legitimate right to undertake this kind of surveillance. And what's probably, to me, in Judicial Watch, I think the most disturbing thing that's happened in the last year is...
And just so people who weren't tuned in earlier, explain how it was used by the Obama administration against the Trump campaign.
Sure, absolutely. Under FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, to add another acronym here, the government goes to a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that they call FISC, because we have to have okay. So what the FBI and the Justice Department did is, back in the summer of 2016, they used, and it's really just kind of startling, because it's now really undisputed by anybody, they used this so-called Steele dossier containing all sorts of misinformation about Donald Trump and his team. They used that Steele dossier as justification to go to this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to get these warrants to listen in on what was going on with the Trump team.
And by listening in, explain how they listen and what ways.
Sure, they listen to their phone calls. They tap into whatever communication system is going on. I mean, really, the kind of violation of our rights that we should all be very concerned about.
Yes, and that's why it's taken on for Judicial Watch. You have so many supporters around the country on this issue alone, because if they can use false information just by listening to my phone calls, listen to what I'm saying in my house, I mean, the ramifications against the Constitution.
Oh yeah, I mean, nobody is safe at that point. If that's where we're at, they not only use false information, they made up information for this purpose. Apparently, right. They bought and paid for this made up dossier that we call it, of stuff that had no substance. But then they used it in the most serious way they could, and went to this court, lied to the court about what it was, and used that to violate, the rights of the incoming administration. It's very serious.
It's very serious, and thank goodness Judicial Watch is on top of this. They've got fantastic lawyers who are in the weeds, whereas most Americans can sort of understand the broad things, maybe understand Russia collusion. You guys are really working on protecting our rights as American citizens forever, not just this case, but to make sure that these things don't happen again. So thank you for spending some time explaining what you're doing.
Certainly.
And we will hopefully have you back soon. Thank you. So get back to the FISC, FISA. So again, you're watching Judicial Watch Live. It's CPAC. And again, the fantastic work that Judicial Watch does is not just for cases that are going on now, but cases that are coming up, cases that are going to affect our rights forever, and affect our rights not just now, but affect our rights, Fourth Amendment right to not be spied on, listen to our phone calls, right? So joining me next is going to be Gordon Chang. He's the author of The Coming Collapse of China and a senior fellow at the ACU. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much.
So tell me, what are you doing here at CPAC? Why are you here? Why is it important to you?
Yeah.
Let me give you this.
This afternoon, I'm on a panel hosted by John Batchelor talking about storm clouds over China. Tomorrow, I'm emceeing a main stage panel with Steve Moore, John Bolton, and Frank Gaffney. We're going to talk about China's existential challenge to the United States. And then tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to be moderating a panel on the rise of conservatism in the Indo-Pacific region.
Well, it's a good thing you have nothing to do the next couple of days.
Well.
So let's start with China, because we interviewed Bolton earlier, Ambassador Bolton, and we were talking about China being of no help, to say the least, on the issue of North Korea and getting nuclear arms. Why? I don't understand. China will, if there is a war, if it comes to war, even if it's a preemptive war, the North Koreans, who are poverty-stricken, to say the least, are going to go to China. Why don't they care more about, the keeping the border safe and getting Kim Jong-un out and creating peace there?
There are a number of reasons. First of all, there's just the historical links between China and North Korea. They were at one point very similar regimes, and there's a certain amount of...
you mean by communism?
By communism. And now North Korea is no longer communist. Now China is actually moving towards communism again.
Wait, it's a dictatorship, North Korea.
Well, what's happening in China right now is under Xi Jinping, the ruler, it is moving back towards a state-dominated society, absolute control of the party. This is really one of the worst trends in the world today. North Korea has moved away from communism, but it's still totalitarian. They're different regimes now, but nonetheless, there's been this historical connection, and so there is a certain amount of inertia. Also, you've got links between the Chinese military and the North Korean military that remain strong.
Explain that, I don't know that.
Oh, well, you have, these two militaries have worked together and indeed fought and shed blood together starting in October 1950 when Mao Zedong came to the aid of Kim Il-sung in the Korean War. If it weren't for China, there would be no North Korea today because General MacArthur was almost at the border with China at the Yalu River. So there's these historical links, and the Chinese military, which has its own foreign policy in many respects, has a lot of say on North Korean policy because it lost so many people during the Korean War. It is thought to have a special equity in North Korean matters, and there are, as I mentioned, these relationships, military to military, that have gone for a long time. Even though the diplomats of the two countries don't get along right now, still China can get what it wants when it pulls the string. It doesn't always exercise influence. It allows the North Koreans to do all sorts of things that bedevil us. And China, the second part of the answer is, essentially Beijing sees North Korea as very important to short-term Chinese goals. Because every time North Korea does something provocative, launches a missile, detonates a nuke, well, we send our Secretary of State to China. So John Kerry, Rex Tillerson, they know their way to the Chinese capital. And when we do that, we don't talk about the things that are important to us, like South China Sea, cyber attacks, predatory trade practices. You name it, we don't talk about it.
Why? Because we're focused on the problems
because
in North Korea, problems in North Korea? Because
we think that if we talk about those things, that we won't get Chinese cooperation on North Korea.
Right.
We've got that wrong.
Okay. So how could that be improved, and who do you see in the administration who has that mindset, understands that concept?
This relationship can be improved, and the way we would improve it is to impose costs on China for clearly unacceptable behaviors.
For trade, do you mean in trade?
So, well, all sorts of things.
Okay.
But on North Korea, it's that the Chinese today and last week and the month before that and decades before that have been supporting the North Korean regime, and now they're doing it in violation of UN sanctions. And the United States knows about it. President Trump has tweeted about the Chinese being caught red-handed.
Right.
But we have not imposed costs of any significant degree on China. And until we do that, the Chinese will continue to support the North Koreans in ways that are really detrimental, not only to our interests, but the interests of the entire international community. Because we got to remember that, North Korea, when they talk about their nukes, they talk about it for use against the US, but these guys are selling all sorts of dangerous technologies around the world. So
the North Koreans.
The North Koreans. They're trading nuclear weapons technology with the Iranians, and they're also selling ballistic missiles to Tehran, and those chemical weapons that are used in Syria, those are almost certainly from North Korea. And probably Iran's paying for it because the Syrian regime under al-Bashar doesn't have the cash to do that. So essentially what we are seeing is Iran paying for all sorts of North Korean items that are being used in the Syrian civil war.
Iran paying for getting it from North Korea, right? Which is the power of North Korea and why they continue to do this. Because they know that if they launch a missile at South Korea, they will be destroyed, or obviously at America, which is I think Americans are way too afraid of fear of a nuclear war with North Korea. I think it's overplayed because they launch one thing, we will destroy their country in 30 minutes.
Right. If they ever launched a missile, as they say, missiles have return addresses. But we got to
say that again. I never heard that.
Oh, missiles have return addresses.
That's a great
We know
line.
where they're launched from, and if North Korea were ever to launch against U.S. territory, there would be massive retaliation. There's no question about that.
Right. And explain to people. I try to. How we are prepared. America is prepared in that peninsula to take out the country.
Well,
it's not like we need to build up anything.
Well, what the United States and South Korea have is a mutual defense treaty that goes back since the end of the Korean War. And the United States has 28,500 service personnel on the peninsula that are backed up by 60,000 more in Japan and by the rest of the U.S. military.
Right.
And so this is the most powerful military on Earth. And we can devastate North Korea. We don't do that. What we're trying to do is deter them. And the whole issue today about North Korea is, can you continue to deter North Korea if it has the ability to take out American cities? There's a lot of disagreement on that. It's an extremely complicated question, but nonetheless, that is an existential issue that the U.S. will face in coming months.
Coming months?
Coming months. Within, let's say, 9 months, a year, the North Koreans will...
We are not overplaying the danger of problems with North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea will be able to put a nuke on top of a missile that will be able to reach the American homeland with good guidance in about, let's say, 9 months to a year. Right. They've already got the missiles that can reach anywhere in the United States. It's just a question of being able, attaching the weapon to the missile. But we also got to remember, the North Koreans for a long time have been able to, if they wanted to take a crude atomic device, disassemble it, smuggle it across our undefended borders, and put it together in the city of their choice. So we've been living with this threat in a different way for quite some time.
What is, the region so well, and obviously I know you can't get in Kim Jong-un's brain. What's the long game for him? What is he thinking this will accomplish? Getting a nuclearized missile that can reach the United States? Is it pride? Like you said, the return address is fantastic. It's a suicide mission if he does that. So why is he to continue to do this?
That's a great question. A lot of Americans will say, all he wants is a deterrent to preserve his regime. And people say, well, they saw the United States take out Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, and the Kim family thought, we need to have a deterrent of our own. Well, North Korea's had a deterrent for decades, and that's the ability to kill millions in Seoul with nothing more impressive than high explosives. But the North Koreans want nukes, and I think that they want them because they think that they can use those to accomplish the family's long-term goal. And we don't need to get inside Kim Jong-un's mind. They've been telling us this for 70 years, and their goal is to take over South Korea, to rule the entire peninsula. And I think that what the North Koreans believe that they can actually do this. Kim Jong-un's been talking more and more recently about, quote-unquote, final victory, which is North Korean code for taking over the South. And the way to do this is to use the prospect of the destruction of American cities to get us to break our alliance with South Korea, so then North Korea can then intimidate the South into submission. This is something that the North Koreans talk about ruling the entire peninsula. So this is not rocket science. This is something that we know because they tell us.
Right, they tell us. So let's just change same regions to different topic. Trade in China. Trade was a major campaign agenda and promise of Donald Trump, and changing. So talk to me about how the progress that has been made to put America first in the last year, how that's been effective, not effective, we haven't gotten there yet. What is your take?
Well, while we're talking about North Korea, let me just mention that the one thing that President Trump has said last year on a number of occasions was he would go easy on China on trade because they were helping us on North Korea. I think the president has started to realize that China, is really not helping us to the extent that we need. And so we are starting to see trade friction. So for instance, there have been this imposition of tariffs on washing machines and solar panels. Solar panels really do affect China. And now there's going because they are the world's dominant maker of solar panels. They use predatory trade practices to put U.S. producers out of business so that we would then be forced to buy from China. So there's those surge tariffs. Also, right now, the administration, the Commerce Department is thinking of tariffs on steel and aluminum, and that will affect China as well as other countries. But there's other things that are going on, and the most important is the ongoing Section 301 investigation into China's theft of U.S. intellectual property. That's being conducted by the U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer.
And just for people who aren't familiar, can you just put in layman's term theft of intellectual property, what that means, how Americans are hurt, how we're hurt from it?
Yeah, it's stealing information, and to put this into context, there are estimates that each year China steals somewhere between $300 and $600 billion of U.S. intellectual property. Could be more, could be less.
And how does that affect Americans' lives? Explain that just so that people understand the impact of it.
Our economy has really moved away from actually making things to actually innovating, to thinking about things, to collecting patents. Think about Apple. Apple doesn't make most of what it sells. It has developed the products, it has outsourced the manufacturing primarily to China, and it collects a lot of royalties and essentially marketing gains. That is the heart of the U.S. economy. And that many people say that's really the future of everybody's economy.
Sure,
but if you steal intellectual property, you are stealing the ability of the U.S.
It's no longer, you can't steal what our train tracks or our cars, but you're stealing the stuff that makes you have jobs, makes you have wealth, makes the economy prosper.
Absolutely. It is the future of the American economy. It's the future of the economy of every developed nation.
And what can be done about the intellectual theft? You were talking earlier about the U.S. Trade Rep, Lighthizer, and what he's been doing. What actions can Americans do to help prevent it, stop it?
Well, starting with one American named Donald John Trump, what he can do is impose the severest of tariffs on all Chinese goods coming into the U.S. This is going to cause some problems, of course, inside the United States. But we got to, and people say, oh, we can't worry, we got to worry about this. But on the other hand, you got to remember that the Chinese are taking so much of the lifeblood of the American economy. Whether it's 300 billion or 600 billion, this is something that's got to be stopped. And so to protect American workers, especially in the long run, we need to make sure that the United States is able to protect the lifeblood, the intellectual property, the patents, the trademarks, all of these things. And so we're going to have to take some things that we wouldn't want to do. But remember, we have so much leverage over China. And so, the Chinese huff and the puff, and people in America worry about a trade war.
Right.
Well, for one thing, there's been a trade war for a long time.
Yeah,
the Chinese have been waging it, and we've been in denial.
Yeah.
So we've got to do something to protect ourselves, but also because we have a much larger economy. We do not have an economy geared to selling things to China. China has an economy geared to selling things to us. Our economy is stable. Theirs is fragile. And also, we're a trade deficit country. Trade deficit countries don't worry about trade friction because they've got so little to lose. China have been racking up these record trade surpluses against the United States. And last year, just one statistic I think highlights this. 88.8% of China's overall trade surplus related to sales to the United States. 88.8%.
Wow.
That gives us leverage. And so we should be using the leverage.
We tax that?
We can also do all sorts of things. We don't even need to impose the tariffs. All that has to be done is President Trump gets on the phone to Xi Jinping, his Chinese counterpart, and says, Comrade Jinping, this is what you're going to do. And if you don't do this, I'm going to put your economy under. He can do that. It's the only thing Americans don't have is political will, and we've got to demonstrate it.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I look forward to hearing on both 3 panels that you've got coming this week. And thank you so much for stopping by and teaching us all a lot of very important lessons. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And so, again, this is Judicial Watch at CPAC, and you can watch us on the Facebook page, Judicial Watch Facebook page, Twitter page, and the YouTube page. And next, I'm going to have with us George and Marianne Gaelic, and they are donors to Judicial Watch, which means they are big, even more importantly, supporters
Indeed.
of Judicial Watch and their work. And I'm going to give that to you, and whichever of you is talking will use it.
Right.
I wanted to understand you, Mr. Muscatella. First of all, where are you from, and how did you learn about Judicial Watch?
We're from Traverse City, Michigan. You know, they always have the thumb. Down here is Detroit. And up here in the resort area.
All right.
And a lot of retirees. It's become quite a magnet because of the water, you know, and everything.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, and this is my wife, Mary Ann. We just recently celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations! Congratulations. That's wonderful. So just tell me, how did you first hear about Judicial Watch, and why do you support them?
It would have been actually, we had been following just informationally, like so many people would. But we were in Washington, D.C. for another event back in 2008, and we visited their headquarters, which is still the same place. And we met the key people who are still the same people.
I mean, I have to say, there's not a lot of places where they just say, come on in and come visit and see what we do, and that is part of the mission of Judicial Watch is transparency. They're not hiding behind some, I mean, it's protected.
Yeah.
You're secure, so don't think they're sitting on the sidewalk. But they, if you're a donor to Judicial Watch, if you are a supporter of Judicial Watch, they want to show you what they're doing. They want you to meet the lawyers. They want you to know what they're doing behind the scenes. It's part of the transparency of the mission of Judicial Watch. So you got to visit. What is it that appeals to you about what they do overall? That you, as an American, you guys live in the quote-unquote flyover states. So to find out about this organization that's based in Washington, does really drain the swamp type Washington things, what is it that has always appealed to you about them?
Well, and it sounds, I mean, their motto is so true, and there's never been a time in my life that we need. You know, no one is above the law is their motto. And by golly, you know, with deep state and all these other concerns as ordinary citizens who don't spend our time in politics. We're not our life junkies in that.
They're watchdogs. They're watching out for the rest of us and trying to keep government clean, so that we really appreciate that.
And they had the focus, and as you mentioned, you know, they're not some, let's say, virtual organization. They're bricks and mortar. They have a team. They have the same key people that we met there when we toured in 2008. Chris Farrell, you know, he's
great.
Mr. Litigator, you know. Tom is the guy we all see on Fox News, and he's spokesperson and all this. And of course, Chris, and you know, so, and what we've seen also, speaking from a donor standpoint, that what they do makes sense. They run an efficient place, and as speaking as an MBA from corporate life, you know.
Your money, you feel your money.
Well, right, and you see one of the things that's available to the public on any of these 501c3s is an IRS Form 990. You're familiar?
I'm not, so this is interesting to me. Thank you. So I should look it up.
GuideStar,
how do you find it?
GuideStar.org, you know, you can log in there and download, and so what you can get
You're
is...
the most, I wish all Americans were this informed on how to, when you give money, how to make sure your money is being used effectively by an organization. So walk us through this. You go to GuideStar.
Indeed, yes. And so what we did is, and we obviously donate to some other good organizations which are present here, like Hillsdale and so on. And what's
the document called that you downloaded?
Yes, IRS Form 990.
Okay, and what do you look for in there that people can do?
All right, the very first sheet on it is a summary of financials. It's basically like a financial statement you'd have for corporations if you were buying it. You know, revenues, expenses, profit or loss, and what's your fund balance. These are basic metrics for the health financially of any of these organizations.
Interesting. Okay.
It lists the board of directors and what their salaries are.
Microphone there.
It lists the board of directors for the organization and what their salaries are, and some of them are unpaid and some are officers of the group. and it shows how much, so you can see money in and money out and evaluate how well you think the money is being used.
And how have you? I'm on my chair. Have you used it for other organizations and found things that you thought weren't? What kind of things would be red flags?
Well, again, red flags would include executives that are paying themselves $750,000. I mean,
of a nonprofit, yeah.
These guys aren't in that ballpark. They're just paid what I would say is market value. Nobody's getting rich on this thing, So those are the things. Then you also have in there the last 5 years of donation dollars. Is on another sheet in the Form 990, so you can see your trend. Are these people really pissing off their donor base? Because if so, then the money's dropping off, you see. And so if you look at the combination of this type of information you get from this 990, you can see what's their trend. You can look up, for example, as we've been, I think since 2008, we have those 990s on Judicial Watch, and see, that they're not only increasing in their size, but, they're not enriching anybody ridiculously. Mm-hmm. You have a stable staff, a management team that works together, and, again, coming from corporate management myself, as I did, this is a substantial feeling of confidence that the donations you're going to make isn't going to be
wasted.
Right, exactly.
And it's the same thing of what they're doing. They're doing for the government, making sure the government is being honest and truthful and transparent on everything they're doing. They themselves, as you said, are saying no one's above the law, including us, right? And it's open book.
Well, indeed, and you don't want to be backing an organization that's a hypocrite. Here we are seeking government to be more accountable, and then the organization you're funding isn't accountable, and they're kind of running away with your money and whatever. Go ahead.
I think above all, we want to say that in the 10 years that we've been donors, we've been very satisfied with our investment, and we encourage others to look at Judicial Watch as well, as they deliver results.
Tell about the CGAs.
Okay. Well, we personally have a number of charitable gift annuities that we've formed with the organization, and that's worked well for us. We feel it's an investment in the future, not just of Judicial Watch, but of the country and for the success of our whole system in this country.
So specifically speaking for the retirement age demographics, I self-identify as a white-haired geezer, so I don't take that as an insult. But as my wife mentioned, we have, starting in 2008, as we got into retirement age, we have done charitable gift annuities, which basically are a way to give money to a good cause like Judicial Watch, but also to get an annuity, which is a form of income in our retirement years while we're alive. So that's something I would ask any of the viewers to think about who are reaching retirement age. Okay? Okay.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thanks for being on, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jerry Dunleavy. I'm the host of Inside Judicial Watch here, and I have a very special guest, if you'd like to come on. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Kurt Schlichter, retired U.S. Army colonel, a noted trial lawyer, and a fabulous columnist over at Town Hall. And sir, I want to have you on because right now we're in the middle of sort of a crisis in our government here. We're in the middle of a bunch of different major investigations. The Mueller investigation sort of dominating the news, and Judicial Watch is right in the thick of things as well. Yep. We're filing lawsuits, trying to get to the truth, trying to get to the bottom of the Comey memos, trying to get to the bottom of what Mueller's up to, Mueller's budget, trying to get the truth about the FISA applications. And you've written some pretty tremendous stuff on this. and I kind of wanted to bring you on to get your insights into where things stand right now with the Mueller investigation and where you kind of see things going.
Well, the Mueller investigation seems to be treading water. I mean, this guy's, he's indicting guys who are behind a bunch of Twitter handles, you know, MAGA guy 74. That's who we're indicting. That's what we're spending all this unknown amount of money to get. Indictments of a bunch of Russian Twitter trolls. It's ridiculous. There is clearly no collusion. There has been no evidence of it. There's been no leaks of collusion. There's nothing. And this is just going on and on. It's not, look, they're not designed to get to the truth, these investigations. What you guys do is designed to get to the truth. What these are designed to do is regain power that they lost at the ballot box. It's as simple as that. And I think it's pathetic.
So walk me through kind of your opinions on the genesis of this investigation. Now, Judicial Watch we're trying to get to the bottom of this as well. And all roads seem to point back to the dossier, right? The so-called Trump dossier. Now, Judicial Watch, we're in court. We're trying to get access to any communications that were had between the FBI and the author of the dossier, Christopher Steele. Now, we filed this lawsuit almost a year ago now, and at that time, it seemed like a bit of a shot in the dark that the FBI would be, you know, somehow involved in this. And as we've learned more, it seems more and more like they were intimately involved. So why don't you walk me through kind of your opinions, your thoughts on that?
Okay, we have an opposition research project going on by the Democrats, which they run through their lawyer trying to probably get attorney-client privilege. They pass this on to their friends in the FBI, and I say friends advisedly because they are literally friends. The FBI decides to go get a FISA warrant to listen in on the communications of an American citizen without telling the judge, oh, by the way, the thing that we're relying on was created by Hillary Clinton's campaign specifically to undercut her political opponent. You know, I litigate in federal courts a lot. And the idea of trying to pull that scam on a federal judge, to go in and not tell him something that is so manifestly material and important, I think it'd be a race between me being disbarred and me being jailed. It just doesn't happen. But apparently it happens here. And apparently there are no consequences. So we need to find out what's going on. And you guys are doing the vital work of finding out exactly how this came to be, of disinfecting with sunlight. And I think that's so important. It's the most important thing there is, because we can't have a government that doesn't abide by the basic rules. And you guys are an important part of enforcing that.
Absolutely, and thank you for the kind words there, Kurt. So one of our other lawsuits, and it's intimately involved in this, is we're trying to get to the bottom of the Comey memos. James Comey apparently wrote, for anyone that's not aware, apparently wrote a series of memos outlining conversations that he says that he had with President Trump. He then, after he was let go, he took those memos from the FBI.
Some of which were classified.
Some of which were classified, exactly.
Now, if I were to do the antics that James Comey, or Hillary Clinton for that matter, when I held a top secret security clearance, I would not be sitting here in a suit. I would be sitting in Leavenworth in stripes. This is, I mean, it's so important to expose the kind of dual-track judiciary or legal system that we have, where some people can commit what are manifestly crimes and walk away with it, and others can't.
Right. So you said you referenced your security clearance. Obviously, you're retired U.S. Army colonel. You're intimately involved in the handling of all of this. Walk me through, kind of step by step, what James Comey did in terms of taking it leaking it to a friend, having the friend leak it to the Times. I mean, walk me through kind of the consequences that there would be for for someone like yourself. Yes.
Okay, classified material is strictly controlled in time, in place, in how it's used. James Comey had what apparently some of these memos were actually classified. That is, they were confidential, secret, or top secret with various other kind of clearance things, but those are the basics. He apparently physically took them from the geographic location they were supposed to be in. At a time, he had no proper use for them. And then he turned them over to someone who didn't have a security clearance with the intent that they be published. There's so many criminal acts there. It's really kind of mind-boggling. And the elephant in the room is the question, why hasn't this guy been prosecuted? Anyone else would have been. In fact, other people are. At the very least, you do this and you get fired. You lose your job. Not after a long time, not after a lot of thought. You get fired then and there. Other times, you're actually prosecuted. But this wasn't just a guy leaving a secret document out on his desk and forgetting to secure it. You get fired for that. That's bad. This is a guy who said, I'm going to take material that I know to be classified. I'm going to give it to a person, take it with me. I'm going to take it out of the building, that is, steal it. I'm going to give it to a person who doesn't have a clearance, and with the intent that he use it, not only to be published, but to influence political events.
Well, because he said in his Senate testimony, right, that he did what he did in order to spark a special counsel investigation.
It's unbelievable. Do we have one judicial system or do we have two? Are there special rules for special folks? That's the important question behind all of this. We're far beyond this collusion stuff. Everybody knows that's nonsense. It's a lie. Everybody knows it. We have to decide as a country whether we have whether justice is blind or whether justice picks favorites. That's really the question, and it's deadly serious.
So what chances do you see at actually getting to the bottom of this? Because Judicial Watch right now, we're in court fighting to get to the actual FISA applications, FISA warrants themselves. Because we've got a Republican memo that's out, a Democratic memo that's probably going to be coming out. But we kind of want to cut to the chase, cut through the partisan stuff, and see the actual documents. Do you think that this is something the government might actually release?
I think eventually it's going to have to. This stuff will come out in drips and drabs. But we've got to keep grinding away at it. Look, the only time stuff like this can flourish, criminal behavior like this can continue, is when it goes unexposed and unpunished. The exposure's coming, slowly but surely. And I don't see you guys quitting. I don't see you guys quitting anytime soon.
Well, we're not going to quit, and I don't think that you are either. So I definitely appreciate your hard work. Do you have any closing words before we pass it on here?
I don't know. Probably none that are FCC compliant.
Well, thank you very much for being on with us, Kurt. It was a pleasure meeting you. A pleasure talking to you, sir. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Bye.
And thank you for being with us. Next, we're going to have author Ron Kessler, whose new book is going to be on the Trump White House. So thank you very much for being with us, Kurt. And welcome, Ron. Good to meet you, sir. And by the way, for anyone that's following us, you can continue to follow us live on Twitter at twitter.com/Judicial Watch or at Judicial Watch. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Judicial Watch. Follow us on YouTube. youtube.com/Judicial Watch, and you can also follow this live stream on our website at judicialwatch.org. So thank you very much for sitting through that little spiel there, Mr. Kessler. And why don't you give our viewers a little bit of a background, sir, on who you are, the experiences you've had in your life, and what your new book is going to be about.
My name is Ron Kessler. I'm an author. I've written 21 books, mainly about the FBI, Secret Service, the CIA, but one of my books was on Palm Beach, and that's how I first got to know one Donald Trump. I flew down with him 2 decades ago to Mar-a-Lago with my wife Pam, and spent the weekend with him at Mar-a-Lago, and we've known each other ever since. And so that's part of the strength of the book that I've written, which is coming out April 3rd. It's called The Trump White House, Changing the Rules of the Game, and has a nice picture of Trump and Melania on the jacket. And it's really going to be the book that Trump fans have been waiting for and dying for. It is honest. It does have a lot of new items, new revelations that I think everyone will enjoy and keep turning the pages. But it reveals the behind the scenes of the successes that we've seen, both on the economic front and the foreign affairs front, and what Donald Trump is really like. He actually gave me an interview for the book. It's the only interview he said he is giving for any book, either in the past or in the future. So we have a nice banner on the top of the book saying includes exclusive interview with Donald Trump, which took place at Mar-a-Lago the night before New Year's Eve. And then my wife Pam and I went to the New Year's Eve party at Mar-a-Lago, which we have been doing for 2 decades. And so we described that, which I think is alone worth the price of the book.
Well, this sounds really interesting. Mr. Kessler, would you be able to kind of walk us through your friendship with the president? Because I think our viewers would be pretty interested to hear kind of what the president's like in person, what he was like before he became president, what he's like with his friends.
Well, he hasn't changed at all. He's just as engaging and candid, and that's the way he was in our interview. But, you know, he had an aide by the name of Norma Forderer, who was his top aide for 26 years and really knew him better than anybody on both the business side and the social side, because she knew him way before he met Melania. And she said there are 2 Donald Trumps. One is the one that you see on TV, who makes these sometimes outrageous comments and outrageous tweets. And then there's the real Donald Trump that we insiders know, who's just the opposite. He's very thoughtful. He listens. And you saw that when the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce called for a boycott of his properties. And then a few months later, the head of the Chamber of Commerce met with Trump, and he came out and he told CNN, my God, he was so thoughtful, he listened. And that's the difference between the Trump that the insiders know and the Trump who's play acting a lot on TV. And these comments are really a two-edged sword, because sometimes they do turn off supporters, but on the other hand, and undercut his agenda. But then on the other hand, it centers him as the #1 topic of the day in the media, in conversation, both pro and con, and that enhances his power and his leadership. So everybody wants to be on his good side, or they're afraid of him, and that penetrates both the economy, the companies who feel that they can expand without being overregulated, as well as foreign countries who don't want to be on his bad side. And that's just the way he operates.
Fantastic. And that's interesting. I think that our viewers would be really interested in that. Would you be able to give us a bit of a preview? I know that the book isn't out yet, but can you give us a preview of, touch on some of those successes that you mentioned, and maybe give us a bit of an insight into what picture is maybe being painted incorrectly about the Trump White House, or what insights you can give about sort of a different side or the other side of the story about what the Trump White House is like.
Well, the book is based almost entirely on on-the-record interviews, unlike this novel that came out called Fire and Fury, which really is just fiction. And it tells the achievements, which we know. We see the economy booming. We see foreign countries trying to align themselves. That is part of the focus of the book. I have one whole chapter called Scam Artists, which goes into the dishonest media. It's not just biased, it's dishonest. And I was way back a Washington Post reporter and a Wall Street Journal reporter. In those days, if you did some of these stories, you would be fired immediately, some of these dishonest stories. And so I cite a lot of examples in a very succinct way. So it really is a book, both about Trump and about the conservative movement and about Nancy Pelosi with her breadcrumbs comment. It's, I think, everything that Trump fans are going to relish. And the other side also will be interested because there will be a lot of fresh, juicy tidbits.
Well, it sounds really interesting, and I, for one, look forward to reading it myself. So, Mr. Kessler, thank you very much for being on. Sure. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir. And joining us next is Joy Villa. She's a recording artist, an actress, has hit #1 on iTunes, supporter of President Trump and gun rights. So, Joy, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Great to
How are you?
Here. I'm great.
And great to meet you. So, Joy, why don't you give me, because I know your backstory a bit, and I know how you kind of popped into focus at the Grammys. I think it was a year ago now.
Right.
But why don't you walk our viewers through kind of who you are, what you're all about, give them some insights into who Joy Villa is.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a singer-songwriter. I hit #1 on the iTunes, Amazon, and Billboard charts after my Grammys appearance, which was really awesome. I'm conservative. I'm proudly pro-life. I really want to inspire others to stand up for virtues and values. I think we do need to take our country back. I'm fully a Trump supporter. I believe in what he's doing. I believe in what the vice president is doing. And I believe in what you guys are doing. Very, very important for us to keep our eyes opened and to see where this country is headed and to make sure it steers and is headed in the way that is going to support a government run for all people, not just for the elites.
So, Joy, how did you get your start? I mean, what is your? Can you give me sort of your political life story? I mean, yeah. I'd love your backstory. I mean, how did you? Where did you start, and how'd you get to where you are now?
Well, it's a funny backstory because it's taken a lot of different back roads, you could say. So I was raised Republican, strong Republican, watching Fox News every night. I love Fox News. I'm a regular contributor now, which I'm very happy about. But growing up, it was something that my parents did. And, as a kid, I wasn't very political. But I wanted to help. I wanted to be involved in leadership. So I graduated early at 16 years old from high school. And as an artist, I wanted to make my city better. So I ran for local office and I got elected to the city council. I was a city council member. And that was my first foray into politics, but it was bipartisan. Fast forward a few years in Hollywood, huffing it, trying to make it as an independent artist, I really lost my value system. I lost my way, and I went in with the popular thing to do. I voted Obama the first term. I thought, oh yes, we need a black president. He's going to bring the troops home. I'm big on a military because I come from a military family. And of course, he shattered every one of those promises and destroyed this country. So for me, I became disillusioned until Trump came in. And late 2016, I said, okay, he is a man who's going to take our country back. I voted for him. I became an outward supporter of his. And now I've started this really political activism to use my voice for my value system. And I do it in Hollywood, which is not exactly friendly to belief systems like mine. But I'm unafraid. Even though I get threatened every day, I'm not going to stop.
Good. So tell me about being a conservative in Hollywood. I mean, what is that? What is that like? I mean, just give me some details. Are there any stories you can give me some insights or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Since we're friends, I'll give you the nitty gritty. It can be ugly, to be honest with you. I mean, I get death threats on my life. Online. I get a lot of people who tell me to my face at events that they hate my politics, they hate everything I stand for, they hate me, they don't even know me. But, there'll be things like people saying, get your hand off my uterus, and how dare you, you're a racist, you're a misogynist. I mean, I'm a woman of color. I'm a racist misogynist. I mean, it has no basis there's no fact in it. They're all about their feelings and they're angry, and so they take it out on people like me. And in, the industry, I have a lot of musicians that I work with and that I know professionally, but on a personal level, they are against everything I stand for. And they hate our president, they hate conservatives, they hate the Republican Party. They don't know why. There's no facts why. When I ask them why, they can't tell me. But there's so much anger, the resist movement, and really we're trying to build America back up. So I have a lot of friends, you could say acquaintances and friends in the music industry that have remained my friends despite our political differences, and we do have, heavy conversations. That's the personal aspect of it. Privately, I keep a very close group of close personal contacts that really are good people who want to see this country rise up. And publicly, it's a big backlash against me, but Latina Magazine, said that I'm a disgrace to all the Latina community. And, Essence Magazine says I'm not really black. I mean, when you hear those things, they kind of hurt your feelings, but I keep on going. They're not going to stop me. And I'm independent, so they can't do anything about my record sales. My album, Home Sweet Home, just surpassed Taylor Swift on the pop charts. It's at #2.
That I actually did not know that. That is actually pretty cool. So congratulations on that. So talk with me about the dresses. I know that's to someone that doesn't know your story, that sounds kind of like a crazy question, but it was the Grammys a little bit over a year ago, and then these past Grammys. Kind of talk with me about what went into those, and how that kind of what that has to do with kind of your belief system and what you're trying to push and what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I went through a personal growth system where I said, I really want to be more vocal about my beliefs and about my convictions. So the Grammys was a chance to do that. And it kind of came out of my own rebelliousness, honestly, because I had voted for Trump. I had to keep that quiet. I didn't even post about it. I mean, on the day he got elected, I posted, like, oh, I'm so glad I voted, with a picture of me pointing to a voted sticker. I got so much hate for that, because people were like, why are you happy? Did you vote for Trump? Like and I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to lose my fans? I'm independent. And then something happened after the Women's March. It did inspire me as a woman. It inspired me to say, oh, hell no. Madonna cannot say she can blow up the White House and get cheers and jeers, and everyone's blaming Trump for what? For nothing. He didn't do anything against women. So I said, this is ridiculous. This has gotten out of control. I'm going to take back the narrative, and I want to show love and support. I wouldn't say F Hillary on a dress, but I said, make America great again, with Trump on the rump. And that was my rebellious punk rock attitude. And it's funny because I knew it would troll a lot of people, would piss off a lot of people, but I did it more as an act of love and support to the president, because there was nothing out there in Hollywood. And it also was like, I don't need those big institutions. I don't need a record label to sell albums. I've done that on my own. And I've existed as a woman who's a businesswoman, as my own person, with my own convictions and values. So this year I did it again with a pro-life dress, with a Choose Life bag. I created the dress myself. I painted it because I went through a crisis pregnancy 10 years ago, and I was encouraged to get an abortion. They said, you're too young, you're 19 years old, you need to get an abortion. And I said, no, I'm going to choose adoption. And I have a relationship with my daughter today. It's an open adoption. She knows who she is. She knows she was loved enough to be adopted into a family that could support her. And it was the best decision, because had I chosen death, every day on her birthday I would have been crying. I could not deal with that heartbreak. But instead it's a celebration of life. So I do wear my value system on my dress. I consider myself an activist. I guess I've kind of coined red carpet activism. Even San Francisco Chronicle said Joy Villa is a red carpet activist. So, it's love me or hate me. I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to keep being loud and proud of my beliefs.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the backstory on that. That's pretty cool. Now, where do you see things going from here? I mean, what's the next step for you?
Well, there's a lot. I don't know what my future holds. A possible, perhaps, congressional run. I'm really looking into becoming more active on the forefront of being pro-life, and more active on conservative values, and supporting the president as we move into 2020, and getting more conservatives elected into government, and empowering other women to stand up and be bold. Because as a conservative woman, if you're in any kind of entertainment industry, you're just told to be quiet. which is extremely sexist. The same things they tell us to, not to talk about or whatever. So I really want to embolden other women. I want to embolden others to stand up and be strong, young people, and I have a book and another album coming out. So I'm busy on the creative front.
That's amazing. That's great. Very cool. So in Hollywood and in this are there allies that you have? Are there people that you're able to count on? And is there an effort that you're making in any way to try to reach into that community? I mean, is this possible? Is this a lost cause? What do you think?
I think absolutely. I don't think anything is a lost cause. I always say, it will get worse before it gets better, but that doesn't mean it's not going to get better. Things are getting better. And I think that the more that we don't let the left hijack culture, hijack music, and own it, we can't just give up on music and movies. We need to make our own music and movies and support independent artists who think like us. Matthew McConaughey was one of the people who actually, he spoke up saying, let's give the president a chance, and I got to meet him and talk to him, and I didn't come out as pro-Trump with him, but we talked about conservative things. So he's one of, you could kind of say, a mentor in the industry. He was very kind and very open about his beliefs. And there's other people as well that have been really great. So there is a community of conservatives. I'm finding out every day more people, because they come up to me at the Grammys. They come up and they say, I love you. I love what you've done. And so I kind of had to steer the ship and be the first one to come out. But I think we're going to see a lot more conservatives come out. And Patricia Heaton, she's been a long-time conservative. I love her. She's been so kind and supportive. And a lot of other people, they're just low profile, but they're coming out. And I'm telling them, you need to come out too. Let's support our president.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, I'm learning a lot, so it's very cool. Talk with me just a little bit about I'm sorry. Talk with me just a little bit about your success there in Hollywood. I mean, what was the success there instantaneously? How long have you been in the industry, and what struggles have you faced? Because I'm kind of interested in. I have friends that work in Hollywood. It's a struggle for a lot of people, and I mean, I'm assuming that it was probably the same way with you. I mean, what has life been like in Hollywood? And
well, I can tell you, I am an overnight success that took 10 years.
Yeah.
Like every overnight success.
Like everyone, yeah.
Even if someone has a backstory, they got discovered, you find out their cousin works in the industry, or their agent actually made the connection. Nobody just gets randomly discovered. And for me, it took years of blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, I've been doing theater since I was 5 years old. And I got into TV production, actually, live TV programming at 16 years old. So I did that in Santa Barbara County, and I've traveled to New York and in Florida doing different, shows. And in 2011, I became a professional musician. But I was doing acting as well, and I was doing the whole standing in line at auditions and trying to get an agent. Then you get an agent who tells you, take the flower out of your hair and don't wear such bright colors and just be quiet and stand in that corner. So it's a lot of this, sit there, look pretty, and be like everyone else. And then it's getting typecast in roles like, okay, can you play a prostitute? I'm like, okay, can you play a hooker? Can you play a drug addict hooker? I'm like, okay, because I'm attractive? Is it because I'm black? What is the thing? I remember a director asked me, can you pretend like you're high? I was like, well, I never smoke pot. Like, well, you have to play a pothead. I'm like, why would I look like a pothead? I look like I just stepped out of a, cartoon, and I dress the same way I did. So you see there's this disconnect, and I finally said, music is where my heart and soul is, and that's where I can be the most myself. So in 2011, I professionally started doing music, but it took a lot of getting with the right producers. A lot of money went into my first album, which hit #1 on iTunes and Amazon 4 years after the fact, by the way, which has never been done before. No one's ever outsold Beyonce, Adele, and Lady Gaga with a 4-year-old independently released album by a unknown artist. So that's something that, for me, I always knew I would make it. It's not like I ever believed I wouldn't make it, even though circumstances said otherwise. I've been dirt broke, sleeping on my brother's couch. 5-6 years ago, I was a struggling independent artist. Even I was touring about 4 years ago, I was touring the country, 26 countries a year. And I was making money doing my independent tours, selling shows, but it still was like, I don't really know if I'm going to be able to make money for that next trip until I do a show, sell albums, sell tickets, and then it sort of funded my international tour, which is very glamorous, but it's also like, okay, if we don't sell enough CDs, this show, we don't get to go to the next city. So there's a lot of, you don't know where your money's coming from, you don't know where the opportunity is coming from, you have to create it, you have to make it. So that made me just fearless. I said, okay, I'm gonna make my own business, I'm gonna make my own life, I'm gonna do this my own way, put my flower in my hair, got tattoos, I'm conservative, I don't give a rat's behind what people think about me, because I know who I am. And that took the blood, sweat, and tears to get here. And I think it's a lifelong journey. I'm still, you know, creating and developing who I am and what I want to do creatively, and speaking out to the things that matter. And this whole movement that's coming up, this creative movement, I believe we are the pro-life generation. I believe we're the generation that can end abortion and that can defund Planned Parenthood. I truly believe that. So it's become something that's very close, near, dear to my heart. Doing music, doing activism, and inspiring other people.
Well, Joy, thank you very much for being with us. I mean, I appreciate you taking some time out, learning about the backstory, learning about you know, the way that you've grown, the struggles you've gone through, and the success that you're having now. So congratulations on that. So I really appreciate you stopping by here at Judicial Watch. I follow you closely. I hope you follow our work as well.
I'm a big fan.
Awesome.
Big supporter of you
That
guys.
is exactly what That is exactly what I wanted to hear. So, Joy Villa, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. And we are going to go ahead and take a very quick break. We're going to hand it off to Emily Miller, our host. So stick with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back. This is Judicial Watch Live at CPAC. It's crowded here today. It's the first day of CPAC. It's a 3-day conference, annual conference of conservatives. It's been going on for, they'll probably kill me for not even knowing this, for probably about 25 years. And Judicial Watch is one of the main sponsors, conservative watchdog group, nonpartisan, and Judicial Watch does, those of you who are watching this know Judicial Watch well, amazing work on keeping the government transparent and making sure that things don't get swept under the rug no matter who's president. And even if something happened in the Obama administration, they're going to and it was wrong and it was illegal and people need to be called out on it. They have, and they would continue to force these cases to come out into the Trump administration because it's not over and people haven't been prosecuted. And so some of these things you hear about in the more liberal media about, oh, they're obsessed with the Clinton emails, or they're obsessed with these things that are old, the conservatives are. Conservatives aren't obsessed with that. Conservatives are obsessed with the rule of law and making sure people are prosecuted. And that's what Judicial Watch does. They make sure that no matter who's in office, no matter who's in majority on Capitol Hill or in the White House, that the rule of law is upheld and people are held to that standard. So joining with me is one of the fantastic lawyers at Judicial Watch, and they do the hard work, and Ramona Katka, who's handles, and everyone, as the lawyers we've had through the course of the day, you all have specialties and special cases that you handle. One of your main areas of interest is the IRS.
Yes.
And to remind people, it came out maybe about 4 or 5 years ago that the IRS, under the Obama administration, was deliberately targeting conservative groups. And at first people thought it was a conspiracy, and then it's become more and more exposed.
Right.
And so explain what is going on with that, because it's not over, and there are cases open on this, and what are those cases?
Right. Well, nothing in litigation happens quickly, first of all. So
It's
you're right.
not like Law and Order. People never
not.
understand that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's 1 hour.
It takes a long time, and you got to just keep pushing and keep going at it. So that's what we've done with the IRS. So this goes back to 2013, 5 years ago, was when Lois Lerner made the announcement with a planted question at an ABA conference, revealing that...
And remind everybody who Lois Lerner
Lois Lerner was the director of exempt organizations at the IRS.
So those are the nonprofits, right?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Like this
it's the exempt. Correct. Either making sure that they're filing what they need to file, exempt organizations, or new organizations who are seeking exempt status.
Okay.
And so going back to 2010, you had the Tea Party movement, and you had all of these conservative organizations filing with the IRS applications to be granted tax-exempt status. Well, 2012 were the elections, and guess what? They weren't being granted status, and their applications were being delayed, and they were being asked improper questions and questionnaires about who their donors are, which finally the IRS came back.
Explain why that's a problem. Explain why the consequences of not being given donor status by the election, and not being given exempt status, and being asked these questions. Explain how that impacts elections and politics.
Well, it impacts it with respect to the actions and the ability of the organization to do what it's trying to do and educate the public about matters that were relevant at the time.
Yep.
And so with their status, some of them kept going at it, some of them just dissolved, let's say,
Because the federal government, using its power of taxation, and was using its power to silence conservative groups.
Correct.
Tea Party groups
And so
especially.
what you were saying with respect to intentional targeting, what the IRS was doing was looking at names of applicants of organizations and finding out if Tea Party was named in there. They were using conservative sounding names to select those group out of the box and ask them and delay their applications, either sending them more questionnaires for additional information. And donor names is one of the biggest things that was highly improper, and the IRS itself said that we're going to stop doing that, but yet this issue was still going on even in 2012, 2013. Finally in 2013 was when it was revealed that there was improper targeting. The IRS and President Obama tried to blame on low-level staff employees at the IRS in Cincinnati. We filed Freedom of Information Act lawsuits requesting emails and documents about the targeting, and we found that it wasn't low-level staff, but it was people like Lois Lerner, who was the director of exempt organizations. It was people like Holly Paz, who was the director of Rules and Agreements Division at the IRS. They were all working together, and not only the IRS, but also with the DOJ and the FBI to target and to actually criminally prosecute some of these groups. And by the way, the FBI then was headed by Robert Mueller at that time. So that's what has been coming out in some of our cases.
So first, the first step Judicial Watch did was when the IRS and the Obama administration's defense was, oh, it was just these little nobodies in Cincinnati. So you said, look, we're going to FOIA, we're going to request for Freedom of Information Act the emails. You got the emails. The emails showed this conspiracy was at the highest levels.
Correct.
And it was absolutely directly targeted at conservatives. And to be clear, this is illegal. What statutes is this break?
I'm sorry?
What statutes are relevant in this?
Well, 6103, a lot of the the Constitution. Let's start with the very basic First Amendment. Let's say freedom of speech.
Oh, because the groups themselves were not allowed to speak, right, in an election.
Correct. If they're trying to do something that's legal and they're seeking legal status from the IRS, and they're trying to educate and speak freely with respect to whatever issue was of their concern to educate the public, and if the government is acting in a way to inhibit that and to get in the way of that, that's suppressing their freedom of right to speech. So that's one of the most basic and fundamental.
And like we said, unlike Law and Order, which is one of my favorite shows, and everything is always, the whole case is, the murder, the case, and everything is resolved, and the case and the trial, it's always a trial.
Right,
and it's always resolved in 1 hour.
Right.
And also I always love how right after the murder, the trial starts the next day, right?
Right.
So explain to me, so obviously, the American public, they're focusing on the Russia collusion or focusing against it either way, the news scandals, but what Judicial Watch does is you don't drop cases.
We don't.
Because you've changed presidents or because it's not in the front page of the news. So where are you on this case? What are you waiting for? What haven't you gotten? And what do you hope to get? Where do you see potential for prosecution?
So believe it or not, the IRS still hasn't produced all the documents yet. So they have limited the time frame for when they search the documents, which they produce to Congress and all these other investigations, congressional investigations going on. So they finally agreed, because our time limitation expanded slightly beyond that. They finally agreed to go back and search for records, relevant records for it's about another 2 weeks or 2 weeks worth of documents that we need.
I'm surprised actually as you're talking that with President Trump having more influence as a Republican president, that things wouldn't be easier to get. Is it because it's the same?
I'm just as surprised as you are.
Same deep state is in IRS.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the same individuals probably processing these records. The FOIA officials who are processing them. So we're still getting records. And the other thing where we are now, there are some other lawsuits that have happened in other jurisdictions, class action lawsuits that were filed by the organizations themselves. And some of these officials were deposed against the IRS and against the individuals themselves.
I didn't know you could file a class action against the government or government official. Is that a new concept?
No, it's not. It's a Bivens action. Basically, it's a class action lawsuit against the government that class action, all that means is the class or the plaintiffs have a common interest, and they
as opposed to separate cases.
Correct. And so common injury, and they were injured all in the same way that their First Amendment rights were violated, and their application status were slowed down improperly. So going back, Lois Lerner and Holly Paz, for example, which are one of the highest officials in this whole thing, they were deposed, and they just filed motions last month, in December, to seal those deposition testimonies, saying that the right, even though the right may want to hear, we've been targeted and we've had some threats of harm 4 years ago, 5 years ago, so therefore we just think that these depositions should always be under seal. Obviously, we think there's a very intense interest by the public, a high interest by the public into seeing what the depositions testimonies were of these two officials who were at the heart of the scandal And so we've opposed that, and we filed our motions and our briefs with the court.
And where, so my last question, where are they now? Where, Lois Lerner and what's the other woman?
Holly Pass.
Holly Pass. Where are they now? Are they still working there?
They're in retirement.
They're in retirement.
Receiving their benefits.
Full benefits.
Yeah.
And so as this case moves forward, do they keep getting called back? Are they still responsible, or does the IRS itself? Well, I guess the class action would be against them specifically.
They were dismissed from the class actions as individuals because they were acting within their capacities for the government. The IRS actually, under President Trump, did settle and admit to wrongdoing.
Okay.
That just happened back in December and in January.
It's
in
amazing.
several of the lawsuits.
This is such an important, and we'll just leave on this note, but something that abuse of power of the federal government to use its power of IRS.
Right.
I mean, the most thing that's so intrusive in our lives.
Right.
For political purposes is so important, and yet.
Right. Right. And that's why we don't want to let it go. We are waiting for all the documents, and until it's completed, until we're satisfied that we received everything and that we put up for the public to hear everything that has happened in the scandal.
Could there be prosecution still?
You know, the administration looked at it earlier. They said they are not going to prosecute the Trump administration. That's just always a possibility with respect to any new administration coming in, and if there's any new evidence coming through.
And it's good. It needs to be told. The whole story needs to be told.
But the public deserves
Absolutely.
to know.
Absolutely.
So.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Likewise.
And keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You do such good work. And so, the lawyers at Judicial Watch, if you watch these interviews, go back to at the end of CPAC or sometime in the next couple of days. All of our interviews that you've seen today are going to be posted on the YouTube page, and so you will be able to watch all these interviews. Go back and look at the Judicial Watch lawyers. That's why and understand what they're doing and the impact that they have, because some of the stuff you see and you've heard just now, this is not on the top. You're not going to see it on the daily news every night because it's a quote unquote old story, but this is stories about our personal freedom, our individual rights, and it's so important that they keep up this work that they're doing. And you know what? I'm not a lawyer, and lawyers can be incredibly boring, but these guys are so smart, and I learn so much every time I talk to them, and they are open to talking to you and communicating with you. So next up is an old friend of mine, Neil McCabe. Whoa.
You look terrific. Good to see you.
Thank you, you too. So tell me, what are you doing here at CPAC, Neil?
Well, I've just rejoined One American News.
Ah.
I joined them last week, and I'll be focusing on investigative pieces and documentaries for them.
Interesting. So what are you working on here?
We're putting together some pieces. I've actually working on a George Zimmerman documentary because we're coming up on the 5th anniversary of the Trayvon Martin shooting with George Zimmerman. So I sat down with George for about 2 different sittings of about 20 minutes each. So it'll be exclusive to One American News. And then I'm just I need some talking heads to fill in the rest.
So remind everybody the importance of why that case got, remind everybody, well, first of all, give me an update. Where is George Zimmerman now? What is his life like?
The man is a prisoner. He's a prisoner of danger. He's under constant threat.
Can you tell me specifically where he lives and what he does?
He's living back in Florida, but I almost don't want to even say that he's in the state of Florida.
Right, but what does he do for a living?
He's in a new relationship. He's working, but he, 5 years later, George Zimmerman cannot live a normal life like everyone else.
That's what I was asking.
We arranged for example, he was leaving our studio. We arranged for an Uber driver. He got in the car. Uber driver wouldn't drive him.
What? How do you know who it was? Because he said
he was
name?
recognized. Will not take him. So then George gets on the sidewalk.
Are they allowed to do that?
Of course not. And then.
You should do a story. Did you do a story on that? Because Uber can't do it. Uber should be responsible for that.
One dream at a time. But yeah, it's. But he's constantly. He'll be at a restaurant. People start taking his picture. They start posting it on Facebook. All of a sudden, they're telling all their friends, guess who's here? He was at a place in Manassas, and all of a sudden, a bunch of people alerted. George Zimmerman's here. Crowd shows up. Security has to escort him out the back.
But explain, people, as we all know, including myself, my attention span on news is about 6 hours.
So let's go back 5 years.
Right.
So
and why that Uber driver today recognized him and refused to drive him, which blows my mind. But go ahead.
There was another Uber driver, just to go back, another Uber driver, because we did different interviews, recognized who he was, and started taking him like 5 to 10 miles the wrong direction, like he was going to be kidnapped. And fortunately, when the car stopped, George was able to jump out of the car. This is within the last week. So, but 5 years ago.
That is startling. Okay. So, I mean, this is news in and of itself. That's why I just want to focus on this. So, George Zimmerman calls Uber Corporation refuses to drive a man.
A driver. The driver recognizes
Yes,
him.
but he is working. It's a company.
Right.
Uber is a company. The company refused service because even though he was acquitted of murder in the Trayvon Martin case, so he's an innocent man, and refused service, and then another time terrorized him. Let's be clear. That's what just happened.
Yeah.
So explain.
Maybe it just seems normal to me because I was there. So telling you
realize
this.
The lawsuit. It's against the law, but we realize the lawsuits and my shock in this this is corporate America can't. If they did it because he was black, imagine the outrage. Imagine the lawsuits. Imagine the flip of this.
Right, but you also, it's like, I'm not convinced that he wants to be in the public eye again either.
Yeah.
So, of course, 5 years ago, George Zimmerman was a volunteer for the Neighborhood Watch. He saw
in Florida.
In Florida, I believe it was St. Mary's.
Okay.
Something like that. So it's a gated community. He's driving around. He sees Trayvon Martin.
At that point, he didn't know who it was.
Didn't know who he was, but he just saw this guy lurking around that he didn't recognize.
Right.
He calls the police, says, hey, I see this guy. And there had been breaking and entering in the community for the previous month. So he was on alert for guys, strangers walking around. He loses sight of Martin, tells the police, I'm getting out of the car to look for him. He gets out of his car, he's walking around, and that's when Trayvon Martin jumped him and knocked him to the ground. He hit him in the head with a rock, was pounding his head with the pavement, and then eventually he had Zimmerman on his back, and with one hand was blocking Zimmerman's nose, the other hand was blocking his mouth. Then Trayvon Martin realized that Zimmerman had a handgun. So was it in his hand or was it? It was on a holster.
A holster.
So, with one hand, he's both blocking the nose and mouth,
He can't breathe.
and then starts struggling
To get
for
the
Zimmerman's gun. And at that point, in that struggle, the gun went off, and Trayvon Martin was killed.
But Zimmerman pulled the trigger.
Zimmerman pulled the trigger, and Martin had received a fatal blow.
It was a very close. They were tight together. They were fighting. Yeah, it was a close a struggle, and shot him, killed him.
Right.
And then it went to, and so this was a huge. Obviously, now people are remembering this. It started. I would say it was the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Sure.
And people are saying, oh, this guy got let off. George Zimmerman got let off. Well, facts of the case are different than that.
Sure,
and
the police.
And also, it was both the Black Lives Matter movement started, as well as the issue of concealed carry, guns carry, and how people who do support it say that Zimmerman saved his own life and it was in self-defense, and that's why he was acquitted. Whereas the Black Lives Matter people are saying that they're just shooting black boys.
It was a murder of an innocent black
boy
young man
who had who had nothing to do, but he was just walking down the street.
Right, and it's initially the police decided not to press charges because it was perfectly obvious by the evidence that it was self-defense. But some people, some left-wing operatives and other people sort of got a hold of the case. They went to the Martin family. They hired an attorney, Benjamin Crump.
Oh, right.
See, it's all coming back now. Right? It was a trial of the century.
All of us, right.
Sure, and so Benjamin Crump then went on CNN with audio tapes that were altered.
The 911 tapes.
Yeah, and they were edited for effect, and basically turned it into the trial of the century.
And so, and what happened? Remind everybody, because it's coming back to me too. What happened in the trial?
So eventually, he was acquitted of the murder charge.
Based on self-defense?
Based on self-defense. Florida had just passed a stand your ground law a lot of people don't even know that their state might have an obligation to retreat, where you're not even allowed to defend yourself.
Elaborate. Explain to people what stand your ground law means.
So stand your ground law means if someone comes into your house, someone comes into your space.
That's castle doctrine.
But
Stand your
if
ground.
someone's attacking you,
Right.
you don't have to. If you have an option of fighting or running, but it's your decision. And so it's very closely related to castle doctrine.
Right. Whereas there are states that have laws that are it is in law that if you're saying you're armed, you're attacked, and you can get away, but you you opt to fight, you shoot the person, you will be charged with murder because you didn't. The state laws. I think Maryland has it. You're obligated to run away if you possibly can, or get out of your house, or get away. Whereas Florida. And we can go through castle doctrine either side. The standard ground is more, because people do sort of understand the castle doctrine. Like you're in your house is your castle, and now you don't have to leave your house, you can. But standard ground is more controversial because it's the public space, and they're saying,
we're on a street corner.
And opponents to standard ground law say, well, why didn't Zimmerman get back in his car? Why didn't he leave? Why didn't he wait for police? And that's where the controversy comes in.
Right, because they spun up the narrative that Zimmerman had confronted Martin, that Zimmerman was looking for a fight, and Zimmerman was at a point where, he's up on capital murder, right? He could get the chair, I guess, or they hang people or whatever they do in Florida,
yeah.
Right? And so he's up on capital murder, so his lawyer says, you don't say a thing. And so for all of those weeks, up until the point Zimmerman had the chance to offer his defense, it was all the other side, and the mainstream media, specifically CNN, had just completely spun up the other side, just basically turned this guy into this monster, and it's still there. He lives with it every day. So a guy who was acquitted, there was really no, looking back, you talk to any attorney, there was no question he'd be acquitted.
Of self-defense.
On
the right to
self-defense. Open and shut.
And remind me, because I don't remember it now, what was Trayvon Martin doing in this gated community? Why did he go after Zimmerman? I don't remember the details.
Well, Zimmerman didn't have a happy life. Zimmerman's own mother had pushed him out of the house.
Excuse
me.
Let's start that again.
Sorry. Trayvon Martin. His mother had pushed him out of the house.
He was how old? 17?
He was 17. So the pictures all show him as a 12-year-old kid.
No, he was 17.
He was a tall, older guy.
But he's still juvenile. He was
still juvenile.
He's juvenile. So
his biological father was in a relationship with another woman who lived in that community.
Oh, okay.
And so, but the girlfriend didn't want Trayvon hanging around, so Trayvon basically would just have to walk around outside and sort of content himself. And he was on the phone with his girlfriend at the time, and of course his girlfriend was saying, do not engage with Zimmerman. It's a very sad story because I really believe this girl loved him.
So do we know, because clearly I don't remember these details, do we remember why Trayvon Martin attacked Zimmerman? What caused the interaction?
He was on the phone with his girlfriend.
At the time?
At the time when she saw, so in real time, Zimmerman calls the police and says, hey, I see this kid I don't recognize. At the same time, Martin is on the phone telling his girlfriend, hey, some guy's giving me the look. I got to see what his deal is. She's saying, Trayvon, stay away from him. But he says no, and that's where he sort of snuck up on Zimmerman, and that's why Zimmerman tells the police, hey, I don't know where this guy is. I'm going to get out of the car and look for him. And Trayvon, the reason why he lost sight of him is because Trayvon then circled back, jumped him.
Hearing it now with the 5 years distance, it caused then and it caused now so much disruption in our society. With the Black Lives Matter movement starting as if white people or Hispanic, in the case of George Zimmerman, don't care about black children's lives, which is so ridiculous. But really, it so could have been avoided. It's a shame that the 17-year-old lost his life over just acting so stupid, really. I mean, if he had just walked away, none of this would have happened.
Well, I'm of an age where, I remember bad race relations, and then for a time in my life, I'm 52 now. So in like my late 30s, 40s, it seemed like the race question had been settled, and it seemed like America had come to a better place, but there were people who had an agenda who really wanted to spin up the race war again.
Well, speaking of that, now it's come back to me when President Obama, during this, not obviously, but normally, politicians don't get involved in open cases because he could sway a jury. And instead, President Obama held a press conference in the White House pressing room and said to everybody, speaking of this case that had not yet been prosecuted, and put George Zimmerman on defense, said Trayvon Martin looks like the son I never had.
Right.
So put him, first of all, he literally does not look anything like Barack Obama, so it's ridiculous. But he created this sympathy, public sympathy, as the President of the United States, using the power of his office, created public sympathy, swaying the jury, because now we're sympathetic for this son I never had. Of course, President Obama at the time has got these young daughters, so it gives the impression of a young child, and it was so bad. And this is our first black president who could have done the opposite. He could have talked about this. Let's come together on race relations. Instead, it was a divisive moment in American history.
A professor of constitutional law, I'll recall, President Obama. So if anyone should have known better, it should have been him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It wasn't. That's true. It wasn't that. It wasn't lay people going, you can't say this thing so it affects the jury. He knew exactly what he was doing, President Obama. So tell me, that is so interesting. I'm looking forward to when do you think that'll air? Because I really want to see George Zimmerman's today live.
Well, the anniversary of the altercation is February 26th. So I'm looking to close it out before the 26th.
Oh, okay.
This is my cross my fingers deadline.
It was 2013, February 2013.
Right.
It's amazing. I mean, and then well, good luck with the editing and the writing. I bet knowing you have a very long interview that you have to edit down. I know that's the hardest part.
Well, I was a combat historian in Iraq, so I know how to let them run.
That's true. What was your favorite story you ever did in Iraq?
I don't know if favorite, but the
Not
most...
favorite, that's the worst word, but most impactful, I would say.
Colonel Steele, who is the commanding officer of a brigade called Rakkasan, he's also the Colonel Steele from Black Hawk Down.
Oh.
So when he was...
You got me involved.
So this guy who was commanding a brigade, the guy told me that when soldiers were killed in his brigade, he would take a helicopter to the battalion headquarters and conduct after-action reports in the refrigerator trailer. He would make the first sergeant and the company commander stand in front of the body bag. He would pop the body bag open.
Wait, are you joking?
No, and he would say, "First sergeant, what should you have done differently so that this soldier wasn't killed?" Captain?
Wait, you got to slow down. You're telling the story too fast that I don't know if people are catching it. So, after action report.
Oh, so in the Army, whenever you do something, whenever an event is over, everybody stops and says, well, what was that all about?
Okay, right.
What went right? What went wrong?
Yes.
So we call that...
What's that called?
We call it an after-action report.
Okay.
And so basically it's like 3 things we should do differently, 3 things we want to change.
And normally I assume it's
continue.
done around a table.
Usually a table, or everybody take a knee, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But
and in this case,
he did a formal AAR, after-action report, in the refrigerator trailer with the body bags.
To make it real, to make everybody really truly and respect.
So the first sergeant in a company, which is about 150, 200 soldiers, that's the senior enlisted sergeant, and then the company commander would be a captain, probably in his late to mid 20s, and it was basically to focus them on what are you doing here.
Wow. That is a story I had not. I mean, it's gut-wrenching. I mean, if I'd seen it on,
Yeah, it was...
gut-wrenching for everybody involved, and you never forget that after-action report.
That's
the one you won't forget, and you won't make that mistake again, because it's so real when it's happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You need to find that guy and do a story on him.
Where
he is now.
I had a track.
Look, I've got a lot of story ideas for you.
But it's kind of macabre. I don't know. Do we have time for one more? Or?
Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys? They're not. Matt, do we have time? Yes.
I'll just say it's macabre and it's crazy, but I'll share it with you anyway, just because I'm in Iraq for a month. When a lot of Americans didn't understand why so many soldiers had tattoos. And for big army, in the garrison army, an army not at war, you don't have tattoos. And then all of a sudden you have all of these guys, and you actually, the army and the military actually had to change the rules to allow the tattoos. And a lot of people just didn't know how to process it because it seemed kind of thuggish.
Yeah.
And nobody was like, well, who are these guys? But the sad reality is, the reason why guys would get tattoos is so that if something happened to them, all of the right parts would go to the same bag, and that everybody would know, people would be able to identify them afterwards. And it's something,
that's so horrible.
And it's something that when you deploy, you live with it and you know it, but it's something you can never share with anybody just because of the reaction you have now.
Right, right.
But I'm sharing it with you now because we're breaking news here at Judicial Watch.
Well, breaking has been informing people of the
Yeah.
realities of war. You know, it's always, it's off shores, it's not there, but we've got soldiers, sailors, Marines all over the world.
Absolutely.
In real time, in danger, and especially fighting on the war terror, places we don't even know. And this is the reality that the families live with, especially the Gold Star families. And it's, you know, we can sit here and talk about other things, but this is really, this is the role of the federal government.
Yeah.
So it's good to see you.
Good to be seen.
Thanks. All right. Well, my next guest, thank you.
Sure,
my next
absolutely.
guest, Lindsay De La Torre, is the with the National Association of Manufacturers, and I know her well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
So, tell me about what is this National Association of Manufacturers? Obviously, represents what we think of as manufacturers, big manufacturers, but pretty much anybody who makes anything. In a Republican administration, things would go better, I would assume.
Yes.
What are your top priorities?
Yes, so manufacturers are growing. Just in the past year, contributing $2.2 trillion to the economy and creating, 12 million jobs for Americans. And so, I'm here to talk about the Manufacturers Accountability Project. So that's a project that we have kicked off. Fighting against frivolous lawsuits being brought against manufacturers. So we're seeing an alarming trend. Yeah. So we're seeing an alarming trend of politicians and plaintiffs' attorneys bringing lawsuits across the country against manufacturers, blaming them for climate change.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Really?
So, yes.
Who's organizing that?
So there's a group of attorneys that have sort of taken this this action.
So blaming each corporation for their role in climate change.
Yes. So in California,
this is great for the economy, by the way, Lindsay.
Right.
This is
right.
great.
Just as we're starting to grow.
I know, right? Right.
Here we are. And so in California recently, 8 suits have been brought in 8 cities and municipalities in California, blaming manufacturers for the effects of sea level rise. And so, what's interesting is that, they're saying with certainty that these manufacturers have caused this harm, but in their bond offerings, they don't mention the effects of climate change. So it's a very interesting issue, and it's sort of the same, we're seeing the same groups go after manufacturers in these sort of cookie cutter lawsuits. We've seen it in New York City as well. Recently, in January, New York filed a similar lawsuit blaming manufacturers for the effects of the hurricane. And so
that blows my mind. I always thought that was like a joke everybody was making on Twitter, like, oh, Al Gore, because Al Gore does blame the hurricanes on climate change, or global warming, or whatever the heck they call it. So they're, oh my gosh, suing the companies for the hurricanes this year.
Yes.
That's just, I have to say, this is, on a more serious note, these are tactics the left uses. This is straight out Saul Alinsky. This is what they do to try to bring it down. Not thinking, as a conservative, do you want a job? Do you want to build? Do you want people to get jobs and pay for their families and their houses?
Right.
These kinds of frivolous lawsuits are what stops corporations from hiring, stops corporations giving you a raise.
It's true, and we see this as a broad threat for manufacturers, not just in the energy sector, but we've also seen it in other areas of paint manufacturing as well. So it's sort of the slippery slope of how this could affect manufacturers broadly. And to your point, just as the economy is booming and manufacturers are creating lots of jobs.
Finally,
exactly.
and they're giving out bonuses. They're like, we got so much money.
Yes.
Right.
And we're pushing for transparency. We filed FOIA requests to sort of see the agreements that have been made between the attorneys.
Are you working with Judicial Watch? Because they are the FOIA masters.
We should be.
You should be.
We
got to talk with the lawyers because
Yes.
when I file a FOIA and can't get it done, I ask them for advice because they are FOIA lawyers. I mean,
great.
it's a specialty because there's one thing this government does not want to do is release, not this government, any government, is release information. And so that's why the FOIA laws exist, is for transparency, but they will wait you out.
And we're starting to see that. We have uncovered that the plaintiff's attorneys in some of these cases stand to gain 23.5% in fees. So, that's a little piece of information that we have managed to find out, but, we have gotten pushback, to your point, that we're sort of waiting to hear, additional information. But it's a threat. It's a threat, and it's a trend that we're seeing these attorneys sort of shopping these types of cases to different municipalities, and we expect Colorado and maybe Florida to follow suit, and so it's alarming.
It is. Tell me what on corporate tax rates. I mentioned it. I just want to hear from you guys' standpoint how because the corporate tax rate went from the highest in the world, 37% I think, to 20%, and we've seen boom, 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 companies giving out raises, giving out bonuses. How have your members reacted to it? How is it? Are they hiring more? Are they building more? What are they doing?
Yeah, so actually our CEO is on the State of Manufacturing tour right now talking about all the great things that are happening in the sector, and we're just seeing a lot of growth. And I think, we're just really worried about this trend that we're seeing, and we just want to continue to see growth for all of our members. So
right, and for your members, which translates down to every single American.
Yep, very true.
Good to see you,
Thanks
Lindsay.
so much. Great to see you.
Enjoy CPAC. Thank you. And my next guest is going to be, if I can get his attention over here. He's on the phone, which is fine. John Gizzi, the White House correspondent for Newsmax. John Gizzi is more than the White House correspondent for Newsmax. John Gizzi is a legend in Washington, a legend of journalists, a legend of conservative journalism. I've worked with him myself when I was at Human Events. We go way back. And John, I'll give you the mic.
Thank you.
I want to say, first of all, where did I just read the most amazing profile of you? I know I read the whole thing, but where was it? So people can find it.
The Free Beacon News, I think,
is that where
what
it was?
you're referring
An
to.
extensive profile of you.
Yes.
Yes, okay. It was amazing because no one had written, you're such an icon in Washington. You're like, but you are, because this man knows, I mean, tweet to him because you can never beat him on political information, on detail. He has this encyclopedic mind, and that's what a lot of you will recognize him because he's been at the White House briefings.
A lot of presidents,
I don't want to make you that old, John, but for a long, long time.
Right.
He's actually getting called on now, where he did before, and even the Democrats have said, they enjoy your questions because those questions are so interesting and in depth, and it's not going to be the news of the day because you know so much. And I'm not even going to be able to ask you questions because you're going to know the answers to everything. John Gizzi, what do you think are the biggest challenges this White House is facing this year?
Well, I think Governor Johnson of New Mexico, the former Libertarian nominee for president, said it best. You can give the president a number of A's for deregulation, his executive orders, and the tax cut.
Yeah.
But he gets an F, and this is Governor Johnson speaking, on communicating his message to people. Yes, he has mastered Twitter in the way FDR mastered radio. However, he has also not really focused a positive message out there about why the tax cuts will benefit the individual, about young families now having a better opportunity to educate their children, things like that.
So I think it's a frustration of conservatives is that President Trump, everybody was he's too moderate maybe. He comes in, he has accomplished all these conservative goals.
Yes.
He has moved to Jerusalem, the capital of Jerusalem. He got tax cuts through. He has gotten rid of the individual mandate Obamacare. He has made sure that nuns aren't buying birth control anymore. I mean, there's been so many conservative agenda pieces, and yet you're there every day at the White House. It's palace intrigue. That's what's the main story of the day.
And as an old, or not so young policy guy, I would rather discuss things that come up that affect policy in the long run. And let me give you an example. The Vice President, who will be here tonight to speak, returned from the Olympics 2 Mondays ago. And he gave an interview with the Washington Post where he said that the United States would begin serious talks with North Korea. And that could include the President and he reaching out to Kim Jong-un. Now that was a big news story because it represents a 180-degree shift in our policy. And my colleague Jenny Pak from Seoul, fellow White House correspondent, was flabbergasted on that. That's gotten minimal attention beyond the actual interview. It has not come up in any of the briefings because everything is on the, as you say, palace intrigue.
Right, and I'm with you. I'm interested in the policy, and conservatives as a whole, we're very numbers oriented. We're very data driven and facts driven.
Exactly.
It's just, who is the audience, and how has this gotten to be that the narrative on the Trump successes of the first year, which the Vice President was here this morning talking about the successes, and he listed them out. He's such a good communicator on them. Why is it not breaking through?
Well, I think you've come up with a suggestion. They could use the Vice President as a communicator. In addition, General Mattis, someone respected by people in both parties.
You don't hear from him much.
No, you don't. He came to the White House recently, and there were oohs and ahs from the reporters because we just simply don't get to see him that much. The new Secretary of HHS, superb communicator.
Remind me who it is.
Alex Azar.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right. And also the United Nations ambassador, Nikki Haley, whom I have said will be a future vice president or president. All of these people could be used a lot as communicators. I've always liked the European cabinet system because they are able to take cabinet members and put them out on the rounds of talk shows, and they usually do a pretty good job.
Since you've been in so many White House briefings, how do you think Sarah Sanders is under attack? Like, it's really I couldn't do her job. I don't know how she stays so calm and so patient.
Let's put it on the table, Emily. First of all, with Sarah, she plays to an audience of supporters of President Trump, and they love it when she said, "I'm going to ignore the rudeness on this side of the room," or when she engages in back and forth banter with Jim Acosta from CNN and tweaks him about his ratings. Now, that said, that kind of stuff.
But mostly, don't you? I'm always surprised that she doesn't get more. I would get more like, angry, I'd say.
Well, I think part of that is Sean Spicer, a friend of 25 years, did get angry, walked off. The joke was he was getting his anger management. She doesn't get angry, and she's not worried about losing her job. The president has full confidence in her. So she dishes it back, but she stays a calm person. I watched her the other night speak at our White House Correspondents Association meeting.
Interesting. That's very good. I mean, that's a way to reach out because this press, I'm in it, you're in it, we've been in it for years. They have never hated a Republican the way they hate Donald Trump. It is visceral.
But let me point out to you one more thing, and I can say this. It used to always be said of the press secretary, and we say it at our Christmas party of the Correspondents Association, at our mixers that we have, that whoever is press secretary, in Ronald Reagan's words, we're off work after dark. And I noticed that Sarah was having drinks with some of the people there. She was listening to people. I mentioned my friend Jenny from South Korea who told her, call on me, Sarah, call on me.
This is important, right?
Yeah, and she was, she treated everyone the same there.
So do what people see on TV, the briefing rooms, when you're off air, when you're in the gaggle in the morning and other things, is it not is the White House less confrontational with reporters who have a credible bias against them?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. The the women reporters organized a little mixer at nights, women only, and Sarah came as a guest, and she had a good time with the reporters, and
so it's less personal.
Mixed it up. Oh, it is. It's always been that way, and I can't think of press secretaries where anything was truly taken personally.
Well, the only reason I say this is because I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post recently about defending Sarah because
I remember.
The attacks on her, I think, have been so over the top. They attack her appearance, they attack her mothering, they attack whether she makes a pie. I mean, it's been. I don't think they didn't do it to spice her that badly, and they
never got personal.
It's so personal, and attacking her mothering, her faith, things like that. It's just, and the reason I put it in the Washington Post is because the Washington Post ran 2 op-eds that week, one from the so-called conservative, just ripping into her on these superficial, not her policy, not her words, not her anything, making fun of her accent, making fun. So that's why I bring it up, is because I think that the attacks on her have been personal and have been way below the belt.
Well, remember something, those attacks come in large part from the editorial offices or, more importantly, social media. And that's a new factor. Mike McCurry, President Clinton's press secretary, said at our meeting that he didn't envy Sarah at all because he never had to deal with tweeting, he never had to deal with Facebook and social media. And he said, Sarah remarked, well, just imagine if President Clinton got up at 7 a.m. to tweet. And then she said, I don't think I want to imagine that.
Well, I'll say I asked somebody at the White House, I said, because when I wrote that column about Sarah Sanders, Sarah retweeted it, so I received for days things that people were tweeting to Sarah, just I got tagged on it. I was so upset. I'm like, how did people talk to her like this, say these horrible things? And I mean, these are just awful things. And so for days and days, and so I asked somebody at the White House in the communications office, I said, I hope Sarah doesn't actually look at the mentions on Twitter.
No.
And they said, oh, she does. And I thought, this woman has such a cool, calm demeanor that if I read the things people say about her, about me, I'd be in tears. But she's just like, she knows who she is. Her faith is strong.
Tough cookies don't crumble easy.
That's a great line.
Yeah, and also remember, tough times go away, tough people don't. And I have a feeling and you can call me back if I'm wrong, she will be press secretary throughout this president's first term.
Oh, yes.
Now, second term, if he's reelected.
There's no challenge. I mean, I don't see any substantive, anyone on either side, whether the press or the White House, any substantive problem in her interaction. The only thing she could do is just get tired with those 3 little kids at home and everything.
Well,
she has to do.
Yeah, I don't think that's a big factor with her because if she's spent her life as a spokeswoman and press secretary, working for former Governor Polente from Minnesota to Bono with the One program that he had to feed the hungry. And that's where I first met her.
Oh.
By the way, Sarah, if you're watching, you always say in interviews, you met me when I covered your father. It's not exactly true. I hope you won't take offense at me correcting you.
We will, and we're throwing in Bono, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have a lot of things.
Okay.
John Gizzi, it's always good to see you.
A pleasure.
The one thing I was going to say to you is I read in that profile piece, which I just read, I love that somebody finally wrote the extensive John Gizzi profile, is that you still have those Rolodexes. And
53.
I thought, when I worked here, oh my gosh. He has, I worked with him in human events. He has, no one's, obviously, for those of you who don't even remember what a Rolodex is.
Yeah, well, that's a problem right there.
I don't even know where you buy them anymore. We have contacts in our phone, the little plastic thing with little cards that fall off all the time. This man never throws out, and he has, how many do you have now?
53.
And you use them.
All the time.
What do you do when you're at the White House and you want to call someone?
I don't call anyone. I wait till I'm back because you can't have a substantive conversation. But I've done entire pieces on a subject by just picking a particular state. I have them broken down state by state and going through it. One of my colleagues, and if you're listening, I'm going to embarrass you, Linda Feldman from the Christian Science Monitor, whenever she goes to do coverage in a place, she calls me and asks me for contacts. I go right to the Rolodex. So there you are.
I love your Rolodexes.
Yeah. And When I complained that they don't make them anymore, Staples and other places said
Yeah.
no. People were sending or dropping them by for me too.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. As a charity.
Right. That's about right.
So good to see you, Gizzy.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Keep the faith.
You too. All right. I love John Gizzy. He knows I love him. And 53 Rolodexes. So if you have a Rolodex and he's looking for Rolodexes because you don't know what else to do with them because obviously your contacts are on your phone, then send it to John Gizzy. So my next guest is Richard Manning with Americans for Limited Government. Richard, good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Good, thank you. So tell me what you're doing at CPAC this year.
Well, we're going
Your priority.
Well, our priority is to be able to talk about things like transparency and some of the Jeff Sessions, talking about some of the things that happen in the Attorney General's office and why we have to have a real return to rule of law and how Sessions is leading that charge in a way that's kind of disturbing.
Be more specific when you say just what do you say? What do you find that the Attorney General is doing or not doing?
Okay. Well, the Attorney General is reestablishing the rule of law by going through process and creating a legal process for going after prosecutions, not engaging in criminal prosecution by leaks and trying to say, oh, these guys are under investigation, destroying their reputations. Instead, what he's doing is he's creating a real internal process, taking the Uranium One case and putting it down in Arkansas, so it's outside of D.C. and can be investigated.
Tell me what the Uranium One case is.
The Uranium One case is where the Clinton Foundation received a lot of money, and Bill Clinton received a lot of money from the Russians, and then 20% of the U.S. uranium was turned over to the Russian government for their use. It was approved through the CIFA process but it has the appearance of impropriety in terms of the Clintons receiving money and then signing off on the turning over 20% of the U.S. uranium to Russian control. So it's a real scandal, and it needs to be investigated. And Jeff Sessions is going at it the right way. Took it out of Washington D.C., took it to Little Rock, Arkansas, and allows somebody who's independent outside this deep state and to look at it and find out if there was in fact laws broken, and if not, if there needs to be changes in the law to make certain this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Great. I mean, that's something I haven't even heard. I mean, I know Judicial Watch obviously does a lot of work on the deep state and what their impact is. Making sure that you hold your microphone at your mouth, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would hold it for you, but my arm was getting tired
that's okay.
earlier
We're good.
today. So tell me some of the other issues. What is your organization? What are your priorities of your organization?
Well, our priorities are to go after the left where they're most vulnerable, talking about their funding mechanisms and things like that. So I'm going to focus just on that for this particular conversation. Department of Labor is a simple example. A lot of the grants that are given to the Department of Labor under the Obama administration directly benefited labor unions. And in directly benefiting labor unions, that money then gets washed through labor unions and ends up in the political process, directly benefiting Democrats. So we're going after that process, trying to create transparency. We're looking at Office of Labor Management Standards there. Actually was cut, their investigators were cut by 40%. One of the reasons for that, why Obama did that, was because they're the ones who make sure that the unions, the corrupt unions, aren't actually stealing the people's money. And they're the ones who also do the transparency related to finding out the funding of unions and their trusts. So one of the things we're pushing for, and I was on the Labor Department transition team for Trump, one of the things we're pushing for is to increase the transparency so those labor unions have to be accountable to their own members and that they are put under the right scrutiny by the government to make sure that the money isn't being stolen. And the fact is, under Obama, they cut the number of investigators of labor unions, their friends, by 40% while putting their boot on the neck of business around the country. So the Department of Labor needs to do their job, and then you restore some sense of stopping the corruption and the kind of washing of government money and taxpayer money to be put it back into political purposes. That's what we're trying to get done, and that's one of the areas of trying to stop the overall funding of the left by the government and by, basically the labor unions as a whole.
How has your work been easier or harder having a Republican? It's been 8 years since you had a Republican administration.
Well, it's easier for a very simple reason. We have people who listen. and we have people who are simpatico in terms of thinking about these things. And as a result, ideas you can throw out ideas and they have a place to grow and to be able to take hold. And so we really focus on trying to be generators of, do this. We don't necessarily have the horsepower to go out and make them do it, but we can sit there and say, hey, why don't you try this? Here's a problem. Here's an area where you should look at. And by doing that, using our expertise and our skill sets, we're able to help the Trump administration direct some of their activities in a meaningful way to try to stop the funding of the left, stop the regulatory regime and administrative state that's designed to destroy our economic development. And as a result, I think we're seeing a tremendous uptick in terms of our economic success in the country, because this Trump administration has in fact taken on the administrative state and at least at some level, has taken some of the boot of government off of businesses' throats.
Well, I mean, that's one of the undercovered stories of this administration is the amount of regulations that have been cut, amount of regs that have been cut, and rules that have been cut, because that was one of the ways that President Obama got around the Republican House, was just regulations and rules, and it was just stymieing government. And it's now you have a businessman as the president instead of a politician. He's just trying to free up corporate America.
Well, and he understands that. Having been a builder, he knows how rules are used to create an environment where you can either build or you can't build. And he's attempting to clear the way on those things. One of the most important things that he's done is taking on simple things like getting us out of the Paris Climate Accord.
Yes.
By getting us out of Paris, he effectively made it so business could invest in real energy development, because Paris, by its nature, was going to kill energy development that was fossil fuels based and coal based.
Right.
And so by doing that simple act caused investment to flow into areas where it needs to flow, so we can have an economic, not just energy independence, but energy dominance. And that's the future of America. That's how we have a 21st century American dominant economy, is by being energy dominant and letting our free enterprise system work, so we grow and we create good jobs, but we also create strong, vibrant companies that aren't dependent upon government largesse to survive. They're dependent upon building things that are good, that are competitive, and that people want.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank
You'll
you.
be here you'll be here.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Enjoy CPAC 2018. The second one we have as a Republican administration, Republican Congress, is fun. And again, for those of you who just tuned in, this is Judicial Watch Live at CPAC. We will be here 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. today, Thursday, and Friday. You can watch wherever you are watching now, whether it's Facebook, you can also, or Twitter. We're also on our live, on our YouTube page, sorry. I had to look down because I've been saying it so many times. So Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, all live stream. And Judicial Watch, as you know, is a nonpartisan organization, watchdog organization, that enforces transparency in the government. My next guest is Eric Reimer. He's a town hall columnist and specializes on immigration. And I'm going to give you that to hold.
All right, thanks so much.
Obviously, a major priority of this administration and a major conflict with Democrats in Congress is what to do about immigration.
Oh, definitely.
Where do you see it going right now? It was supposed to be part of the budget negotiations. It's not been addressed. And Vice President Pence said earlier, we are going to build a wall on the border, and the real issue now is funding the wall and what to do about the so-called dreamers, which are the people who came here as children through no fault of their own, and whether we give them a road to citizenship. So explain to me what the priorities are, where you see it going, how you see it coming up in Congress.
For sure. I mean, I think immigration right now, it's such a multifaceted issue, and sadly, I think Democrats the past few months have been really pandering to the base on it. They've been really, I mean, we saw the shutdown in January, how they were willing to shut down the government just to try to force an immigration bill immediately. And I think that the fact is that illegal immigration, it's simply, I think everyone in the country agrees that we need to put an end to illegal immigration. I think that DACA, I think large majorities of Americans do believe that we need a humane solution to the problem. I think that certainly no one wants to support people breaking our laws or entering our country illegally. But for DACA recipients, it's a little bit different because a lot of them came over with their parents when they were young. They did not willingly and consciously choose to break the law, unlike their parents. And
but haven't the deportations, ICE deportations, have doubled or tripled or something?
Oh, they have, yeah.
And so talk about. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with criminal deportation. Well, sanctuary cities do. So, at least in the conservative world, in this world here at CPAC, criminal deportation is just very important to get people who are already against breaking law and then convicting crimes against Americans out. And then you see a lot of, in the mainstream media, sort of liberal media, these sort of sad stories of people who've lived an honest life, came here illegally, but have a family life, are being deported. How do you think that's affecting the perception of the president's agenda on immigration?
I mean, I think these are definitely very tough issues. I think that certainly the media focus has been a lot on like these human stories of people who've been, they like to show people being taken out of their homes, and deported immediately. But I mean, the fact is, under the Obama administration, there was also a lot of deportations, and so I think part of it is a shift in media coverage of these deportations rather than like an actual change in the methods of deportation. I think I think DHS and ICE, they still operate under the same general styles and mannerisms as they did before, and so I think there's more simply media focus on the more rough and tumble process of deportation. And I think with law enforcement, I think no one likes to see kind of like the sausage be made, and no one. I mean, arrests are inherently a very tough thing to watch. I do think that the fact is we do need to enforce our immigration laws. I think that when we show that we tolerate lawlessness, that it encourages more lawlessness. And I think that while doing that, we should be looking to create a new regimen where these things won't be happening in the future. Because, I mean, if we have
building
less...
a wall.
like measures like securing our border. And I think that by putting an end to future illegal immigration, we can prevent the sad situation we're in right now for the 10 million or so illegal immigrants who are currently in the country. And I think also...
10? I always hear 30.
I mean,
are the numbers? Nobody knows.
I mean, it's very hard to estimate given the nature of the problem.
And I think the estimates come from there's a bias in the estimates depending on who
exactly.
you are.
I mean, it depends on whose agenda is being promoted. And I think with that too, it's very important in looking at the illegal immigration problem, also looking at the legal immigration problem. I think that right now our legal immigration system is very broken. We have legal immigrants who could contribute a lot to our country, who are waiting in line for sometimes up to 20 years or more.
Wow.
I think that, definitely. And these are people who are following our laws and not jumping the line. And
wow.
Yeah.
So talk some of the things that President Trump has said that he is going to end is, but this is not put into law, from what I understand, chain migration, and explain that. And but what he's trying to get through Congress versus what Nancy Pelosi has said is her agenda, what she's going to get through, wants to get through Congress, and how they're going to have to come together through this.
So chain migration, also known as the Family Reunification Program, it's a very complex program. Essentially, it means that if someone is allowed to immigrate to the U.S. by merit or diversity or whatever, they can also bring their relatives over to a certain degree. And I think it's a very complex policy because, I mean, on one hand, that it helps immigrants transition to our country when they have, like, say, their parents over or their brother over. On the other hand, it's also very easy to abuse if it's not controlled. For example, if they allow their third cousin over or whatnot, and that suddenly brings a lot of people who...
third cousin.
Yeah, exactly. It's and so it's very distant relations, and these people who have... who aren't coming in by merit, who are coming in because of their relation. And so it's a very complex program, and it certainly does need some reform, I think. And I think that there's a lot of common ground for Democrats and Republicans to come together on the immigration issue by clamping down on illegal immigration and supporting sensible legal immigration reform. I think a lot of what's going on right now is politics, essentially. I think Democrats are trying very hard to use this as a wedge issue to drive up turnout for their base, to try to appeal to Hispanic Americans, which I think it won't necessarily appeal to it, because I think a lot of legal immigrants, aren't really fans of people who support illegal immigration, and so I think it might not be the political tool they're hoping it to be, and I think that. Even in our hyperpolarized time, hopefully a solution will come about. I think that both...
Well, talk about what's going to happen in Congress in the next 2 months.
Yeah, precisely. I think that both Democrats and Republicans have seen that both sides are definitely going to hold their ground and like not just simply give the other side everything. I think we saw that like the shutdown in January was negative because it was a paralysis of government, but it also was positive, I think, in showing that both sides do need to compromise on this issue, that Democrats will, not simply accept every GOP proposal, and Republicans will also not simply cater to Democrat demands. And I think that both sides are showing that they believe strongly in their positions, and I think that both sides have a lot of sensible things to bring to the table on this, because it's an issue that affects our entire country. I mean, it defines our country's borders and composition, and I think that hopefully there will be a solution to it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much as well.
Thank you. I'm being told Jerry is coming onto the set. I'll just give you the chair and the microphone. Go to him.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay.
So I guess we're going to just kind of do a final sort of wrap up on the day and kind of all the great guests that we had and everything like that.
Oh, okay.
You just did an awesome job. The interview with Bolton, with Ambassador Bolton, I really enjoyed that. I mean, how long have you known the ambassador?
Well, I worked at the State Department. I was the Deputy Press Secretary under Secretaries Powell and Rice. It was in the Bush 43. And as you heard in Ambassador, I thought was the funniest line of the whole day. And I said to Ambassador Bolton, before he was ambassador to the UN, he was the Undersecretary at State when I was there. And the State Department, like any ridiculous government, has anything related to the government has the acronyms that just make absolutely no sense. And I remember when I first started working there, everything was an acronym. Oh, go talk to M, go talk to PA, it's up in S, it's all in, and I never knew, it was like, it's a whole different language, it's all in acronyms. And so that was actually, John Bolton, not known for being the most like strong sense of humor. I said, I know you're Undersecretary for Arms Control, but what were you? And he was like, I was T. I was like, that's hilarious. Nice. So, but he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, and his views on foreign policy and the dangers we're facing so we will be, that interview, as long as every interview we've seen today will be on the Judicial Watch YouTube page in the next day or so, because we're back here tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. President of the United States speaking at 10 a.m. I think 10:15 about-ish, so make sure you start in here tomorrow. We will have the President of the United States, President Trump, live. Remember, CPAC is where President Trump got his start in the conservative movement, and so he loves it here. And you heard Vice President Pence earlier today saying that he had talked on the phone to the president, and that the president was very excited to come, because he got support of the base here at CPAC. I will have to go back and I'll say it tomorrow when I remember what year it was that he spoke. And I remember I was there and watching, and CPAC, you don't get more far right than we have here. And this is the most conservative audience you're going to ever speak to. And they loved Donald Trump, which was so unexpected. This billionaire New Yorker, and nobody saw it coming. And he has maintained this extremely high support among conservatives throughout his term, all on policy. And it has not budged whatsoever. And so he does love coming here. So he'll be here tomorrow. We have a lot of other great guests. Yeah. CPAC will be here CPAC is a 3-day conference every year in Washington for conservatives, conservative organizations, conservative media to come together to bat around ideas, solutions to problems, work together, network. It's really important. I mean, just everyone's at these different organizations around the country to meet and see how you can cooperate and work together. And you guys have been getting, I think, your social media, Judicial Watch's social media is enormous, and has supporters are so enthusiastic. So just tell me a little bit about how your social media, how people can comment, questions that we can use tomorrow, and engage with us on this, and where to find it. And
absolutely. So I am actually, one of my many hats is I'm the social media director at
I didn't even know
Judicial
that. I
Watch.
just threw you that question.
I know.
All right,
so there
good.
you go. That's perfect.
Okay.
And our followers, they're devoted, they're smart, they're on top of everything that they're doing. They're always looking for the latest from from Judicial Watch. So what I would say is that if you want a question answered tomorrow, leave it in the comments here on this video, and you can also, I'm going to put up later today, make sure to follow what we're doing on Facebook and Twitter, because we're going to be putting up all of the details about our guests tomorrow and everything like that, so you can know what's in store for tomorrow.
Well, that's great. So then people can ask if they have questions for certain guests, we can find them and we'll use them.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think it's always, I love social media. And people who know me know I love social media. So you can tweet also, if you have any questions, tweet me at Emily Miller. My Facebook page is Emily Miller DC, and I have this Facebook over there streaming. So I will go home and read everything and make sure that we are listening. Because it's what's so important as conservatives, I think social media is so important, is because there's no hierarchy.
Right.
It's if you are tweeting to me, or if you're writing a comment on Facebook, or to you, to Judicial Watch, to me, I'm reading it. You're reading it. Senators are reading it. The president, because he's going to retweet it.
Yeah.
Not on Facebook, but if you tweet to him, he's reading it.
Right.
So,
and in fact, the president quote tweeted Judicial Watch's president just about a week ago as well. So.
Oh, what tweet was?
It was about the Russia investigation and Judicial Watch's work.
What, and specifically, what do you remember?
Well, I'll actually reshare it on social media so that everyone can.
I'll go look.
Can see it again, because it's pretty cool. And like you said, it shows sort of the barriers that we're able to break through on social media and get directly to.
Right.
To
so
our
those
followers.
of you who can't be here at CPAC, because obviously it's in Washington, not everybody can come in for it. It's a way for you to let us know what you want us to ask people and what you think about all of this. And it's CPAC is, I've been to CPAC a lot, and it's different. It's a lot more enthusiastic and a lot more heavily populated on years when you have a majority Congress, a Republican, and president. But this is an election year, and there's a lot more. Last year was more of like a victory year. This is oh no, could they lose the House? This is a lot of election issues going on, of what the priorities are going to be going into November, and I think you see a lot of that coming up through the speeches.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's great about working at Judicial Watch is the work that we're doing. We're right in the thick of things. We are. We're diving directly into getting to the bottom of the Mueller investigation and getting to the bottom of what's going on with the FBI and the DOJ and everything like that. And you had a couple of our attorneys on earlier, and those are the people that are really doing the hard work. And then it's just for us to help them, get it out there. And one thing that I would add is don't just follow Judicial Watch. Do follow Emily on Twitter as well. She's a great follow. She's very fun. She's very smart. So
That's very nice of you.
at Emily Miller.